Lyra Thorne moved through the whispering woods, the scent of damp earth and pine her truest companion. Sunlight filtered, dappling the mossy floor in shifting patterns. Her agile form was silent. Amber eyes scanned the undergrowth for any flicker of movement. Hunger was a familiar ache, a constant reminder of her solitary existence. She tracked a young deer, its prints fresh in the soft soil, leading her deeper. Cool air brushed her skin, raising goosebumps. Her dark hair, usually braided, escaped its confines, brushing her cheek. She drew an arrow, its fletching of familiar comfort, and knocked it with earth-stained fingers. A twig snapped, almost imperceptible. The deer lifted its head, dark eyes wide. Lyra froze, melting into the shadows of a towering oak, her breath held tight. She felt the forest pulse, its silent communication of rustling leaves. This was her world, where instinct was law and survival an unforgiving ritual. Loneliness faded in the sharp focus of the hunt. Her inner voice sang with primal intent. This was not merely sustenance. It was proving her resilience to the woods. She would not fail. Her heart hammered a steady rhythm against her ribs. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The deer, sensing no further threat, lowered its head to graze once more. This was her moment. Lyra exhaled slowly, the air tasting of pine and damp soil. The bowstring hummed as the arrow flew true. The kill was swift and clean. She approached the fallen animal with reverence. A silent apology whispered into the air. It was a life taken, but never without gratitude. Lyra touched the deer's warm flank, feeling the warmth of its fading life. A profound empathy, a quiet sorrow, touched her. The journey back to her sanctuary was slower, the weight of her bounty a welcome burden. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange, when Lyra reached the secluded heart of the Whispering Vale. Here, the canopy opened, bathing a small, overgrown clearing in generous light. The air was hushed, sacred. It smelled of ancient earth, wild lavender, and something profound. At the clearing's center stood a weathered stone cairn, moss-covered, surrounded by wildflowers. They bloomed in defiance, vivid against the gray stone. This was the grave, her sanctuary, her purpose. Lyra laid her hunting spoils beside an ancient tree root, then knelt. Her fingers, nimble and accustomed to delicate work, began to tend the earth around the stones with gentle reverence. The cool stone was smooth beneath her touch, worn by countless seasons. She ran her palm over its surface, a familiar gesture that brought strange comfort. This grave, whose occupant remained a mystery, was her anchor. No names were carved, just the quiet presence of someone long gone, someone Lyra had vowed to protect. She knelt for a long time, her eyes tracing the delicate petals of the wildflowers. Some she had planted herself, others had sprung up naturally. The silence here hummed with quiet energy, a profound peace settling deep into Lyra's bones. Her loneliness felt less burdensome within these sacred bounds. Here she was never truly alone. She was a guardian, a keeper of secrets. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of quiet duty and belonging. It was a rare indulgence, a moment of vulnerability in a life built on strength. The setting sun cast long, dancing shadows, making the flowers glow with ethereal light. Lyra felt a deep connection to the unknown soul beneath the stones. She knew this place was sacred, and she was its protector. It was a purpose that gave meaning to her solitary days, a warmth filling the hollow places in her heart. Miles away, King Gareth Blackwood paced the cold flagstones of his interrogation chamber within the Blackwood Citadel. The air hung thick with tension, heavy with the scent of old stone and fear. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows that made the grim gargoyles seem to writhe. Gareth's dark hair fell across his sharp features, partially obscuring a battle scar. His intense silver eyes, usually cold, now burned with barely contained fury. Before him, a man named Thomas knelt, bound and bruised, his eyes wide with terror. He was a rogue scout, captured crossing Blackwood territory. Lord Alaric, Gareth's loyal advisor, stood quietly beside the king, his weathered face etched with familiar concern. Alaric's presence was a steadying anchor, but even he could not quell the king's decade-long ache. Gareth's voice, usually a controlled instrument, held an edge of dangerous impatience. "Speak again," Gareth commanded, his words echoing. Tell me once more of this forbidden territory, this ancient grave. Leave nothing out, or you will regret every breath you take. Thomas swallowed hard, his throat dry. It's just rumors, my king. Whispers among the outcasts. Tales of a valley deep in the whispering woods. They call it the Whispering Vale. His voice was raspy. He tried to meet Gareth's gaze but flinched from the icy intensity. Gareth took a slow, deliberate step closer. His powerful frame cast a terrifying shadow over the kneeling man. The clank of his armor was the only sound for a moment. Rumors have a source, Thomas. What kind of grave? Who is buried there? His voice was low, dangerous, a predator circling its prey. The gnawing emptiness of his mother's disappearance outweighed any burden of his crown. Thomas trembled visibly, his eyes darting frantically. They say it's very old, my king, hidden away and protected, fiercely protected by something wild. A spirit, some say, or a beast. He risked a glance at Alaric, seeking intervention, but Alaric remained stoic. Gareth scoffed, a humorless sound. A spirit? A beast? Or perhaps just a desperate fool trying to guard something they should not possess. His mind raced, seizing on every detail. He had spent 10 years searching for Queen Lyra, his mother, since she vanished. Every fruitless expedition had deepened his sorrow, hardening him. The thought of her, lost somewhere, was a constant torment. They say it's a woman's grave, Thomas stammered, spurred by Gareth's silent intensity. A queen, some even whisper, but no one goes near. The wild thing that guards it does not suffer intruders. A queen. The word struck Gareth with the force of a physical blow. His mother had been queen. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. Could it be? After all this time, could a rogue's tale lead him to truth? His silver eyes, usually devoid of emotion, now flickered with raw, desperate hope, veiled by sternness. The thought of his mother buried unmourned fueled a fresh wave of controlled rage. Lord Alaric stepped forward, his measured voice a calm counterpoint. My king, the whispering woods are vast. Many ancient tales cling to those shadows. This could be local superstition. Gareth turned his hawk-sharp gaze to Alaric. And what if it is not, Alaric? What if these whispers hold a grain of truth? I have chased shadows for 10 years. Every false trail only strengthened my resolve. I will not dismiss any chance now. His voice was firm. The yearning for his mother's bond lingered deep within him, a secret wound never truly healed. He turned back to Thomas, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The cold steel felt familiar, an extension of his will. Describe the location again. Every landmark, every twisted tree, every stream. Leave nothing out. Your life depends on the accuracy of your memory. Thomas, sensing the chilling determination, began to recount every detail he had ever heard. He spoke of a hidden path, a small waterfall, in a cluster of ancient, colossal oaks that marked the Vale's entrance. He spoke of the strange, compelling silence that blanketed the area and the primal fear it instilled. Gareth listened intently, his gaze fixed on some distant point, visualizing the path Thomas described. His mind, accustomed to strategy and conquest, now focused on this single, desperate quest. The thought of his mother, perhaps resting in peace all these years, brought a strange mix of profound grief and fierce loyalty. He had sworn to find her, and he would. Once Thomas had exhausted his knowledge, his voice hoarse, Gareth dismissed him with a curt nod to two waiting guards. Take him to the dungeons. Let him await my judgment. He turned to Alaric, his jaw set in a grim line, his silver eyes burning with renewed purpose. Ready the trackers, Alaric, the most skilled, those who know the whispering woods like the back of their hand. Alaric bowed his head, sensing the immense weight of the command. At once, my king. For what destination? Gareth's voice was low, edged with unwavering conviction. The Whispering Vale, the ancient oaks, the rumored grave. A flicker of hope and dread crossed his features before settling into grim resolve. I want every path into that vale sealed. No one gets in and nothing gets out until I have seen it with my own eyes. I want my mother's resting place found, and whatever, or whoever, guards it, brought before me. He was unaware of the wild guardian awaiting them, fiercely devoted to her sacred charge. A whisper, like a brush of silk across dry leaves, stirred Lyra awake. It was not the wind. A shiver traced its way down her spine, a prickle of unease that settled deep in her bones. The air, usually thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, now carried a faint, alien tang. Her amber eyes, usually soft in sleep, sharpened, scanning the dim confines of her small, hidden shelter. Something was wrong. She had lived in the Whispering Vale for years, attuned to every rustle, every snap of a twig. Her omega instincts, honed by solitude and necessity, were rarely wrong. A cold certainty coiled in her gut. Intrusion was coming. Her sanctuary, the quiet resting place she fiercely guarded, was no longer safe. A sense of dread, heavy and ancient, pressed down on her. Lyra rose with the silent grace of a forest cat. Her muscles, lean and strong, moved without a sound. The morning mist still clung to the ancient trees, blurring the edges of the familiar world. She stepped out, her bare feet barely disturbing the moss. A profound sense of violation washed over her. This veil was her world, her purpose, her silent promise to the one who lay beneath the stone. Her heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She crouched low, pressing her ear to the earth. The faint vibrations were there, distant but distinct. Too many footsteps, too heavy for deer, too rhythmic for wild creatures. They were coming from the north, along the ancient game trail that few knew existed. Her fingers locked around the small, silver locket hidden beneath her tunic. It offered a cold comfort against her skin. The very thought of these intruders desecrating the quiet dignity of the grave made a guttural growl rumble in her throat. Anger, sharp and potent, mingled with her fear. She had devoted her life to this place, to this silent vow. She would not let it be broken. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of strategies and defensive maneuvers. This was her home, and she would protect it with every fiber of her being. Lyra cast one long, yearning look towards the humble stone cairn, half hidden by wildflowers. A silent plea, a desperate promise, passed between her and the earth. She moved with an urgent, primal energy. Her hands, calloused and quick, began their work. Every fallen branch, every tangle of vine, every patch of thick undergrowth became a potential weapon, a silent deterrent. She started with the outer perimeter, working her way inwards, her movements fluid and economical. Her senses were alive, picking up the faintest scent of wood smoke from far away, the distant murmur of voices carried on the wind. Thick, thorny bushes, carefully pruned over seasons, were now twisted into dense, impenetrable barriers along the less obvious paths. She wove sharp, stiff branches into the natural landscape, creating subtle trip hazards that would snare an unwary foot. Her memory of the terrain was absolute, every dip and rise, every hidden hollow known to her intimately. She knew exactly where a shadow fell at midday, where the ground was softest after a rain. Lyra's hands worked with a frantic, yet precise efficiency. She gathered long, supple vines, braiding them tightly into invisible snares. These she carefully disguised with fallen leaves and moss, draping them over low branches, setting them just high enough to catch a boot. She sprinkled dried, brittle leaves over loose soil, creating false footfalls that would give away an intruder's presence with a loud crackle. This was not just survival, it was an act of profound devotion. She felt the eyes of the forest upon her, the quiet approval of the ancient trees. They had been her companions, her silent witnesses, for so long. The thought of their peace being shattered fueled her resolve. A tear, hot and defiant, tracked a path down her dust-streaked cheek. It was not for herself, but for the sacred stillness she might lose. This conflict was a deep, aching wound before it even began. Her work continued through the morning, unrelenting. She camouflaged her own scent with crushed herbs and damp earth, rubbing them onto her worn leathers and furs. She chose her path carefully, never leaving a trace, blending seamlessly into the dappled light and shadow. Her heart pounded with a fierce determination, a drumbeat of defiance against the unknown threat. This was a dance of survival, a desperate fight for her quiet existence. She knew these were not simple trappers or lost wanderers. The strength of the vibrations, the methodical approach, spoke of trained individuals, perhaps even soldiers. The thought made her breath catch. Who would seek out this hidden place with such deliberate intent? What could they possibly want here, in this sacred, forgotten corner of the world? Her mind offered no answers, only a primal surge to defend. As Lyra secured the final trap, a shiver ran through the leaves overhead. The sound of distant shouts, muffled but clear, reached her ears. They were closer now, much closer. She pressed herself against the trunk of an ancient oak, her body becoming one with the rough bark. Her breathing slowed, barely perceptible. The veil held its breath with her. Meanwhile, King Gareth's elite scouts, led by Lord Alaric, moved through the dense forest with practiced silence. Alaric, his weathered face etched with years of experience, led the vanguard. His eyes, kind yet watchful, scanned every shadow, every movement in the canopy above. The forest here felt different, wilder, older, as if time itself moved at a slower pace. A faint hum of ancient power seemed to resonate from the very earth beneath their boots. "Stay sharp, men," Alaric murmured, his voice a low rumble. "The king believes this area holds secrets. Do not underestimate what might protect them." His words were unnecessary. His men were already on high alert. They were chosen for their skill, their keen senses, their unwavering loyalty. But even they felt the strange, almost sentient quiet of this place. The air grew cooler as they ventured deeper. Sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. The scent of pine was overwhelming, mixed with the dampness of moss and the sweet decay of fallen leaves. It was beautiful, but a beauty that hinted at hidden dangers. Alaric felt a flicker of unease, a premonition that this journey would be unlike any other. He remembered King Gareth's intensity, the grim set of his jaw. 10 years of relentless searching had hardened the young king, turning his grief into a cold, unwavering resolve. Alaric had stood by Gareth's side through it all, offering counsel, tempering the king's impulses. He knew the king's devotion to his lost mother, Queen Lyra, was the driving force behind this relentless quest. But to find her grave here in such a secluded, forgotten place, it defied all logic. Queen Lyra was known for her wisdom, her grace, her deep love for her people. Why would her final resting place be shrouded in such mystery, hidden from her son, hidden from her kingdom? The questions gnawed at Alaric, even as he focused on the immediate task at hand. "Hold," Alaric whispered, raising a hand. His men froze, melting into the shadows. He had seen it, or rather, felt it, a barely perceptible shift in the undergrowth ahead. Something unnatural. His gaze narrowed, scanning the intricate patterns of the forest floor. There, a vine, slightly out of place, too taut, too deliberate. One of his scouts, a young man named Thomas, moved forward cautiously, his eyes sharp. Thomas had a reputation for spotting the most subtle of traps. He knelt, examining the vine, his brow furrowed. "Lord Alaric," he whispered, "a tripwire, expertly laid, almost invisible." His voice held a note of grudging respect. Alaric nodded slowly. This was no common poacher. This was someone with intimate knowledge of the forest, someone with patience and skill. He signaled for his men to be even more vigilant. They proceeded, each step measured, each glance thorough. The silent forest seemed to watch them, its ancient eyes unseen but felt. They bypassed several such traps, each one a testament to the maker's cunning. A false path leading to a tangle of thorny bushes, a pile of loose stones carefully placed to trigger a small rock slide, a shallow pit camouflaged with leaves. Alaric felt a growing admiration for their unseen adversary. Whoever was protecting this place, they did so with dedication and mastery. "This is more than just protection," Alaric murmured to another scout, Jack. "This is a declaration, a silent warning." Jack nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. The tension in the air was palpable, a thrumming chord of anticipation and caution. They were nearing their objective, they could feel it, but the resistance was growing fiercer with every step. The forest seemed to thicken, the trees growing taller, older, their branches intertwining like gnarled fingers. The path, once faintly visible, vanished altogether. They were now pushing through untouched wilderness, guided only by their instincts and the king's specific instructions regarding the rumored location. Alaric felt the weight of his responsibility, to Gareth, to the kingdom. He imagined the king back at the citadel, pacing his chambers, consumed by his relentless quest. Gareth's grief was a living thing, a shadow that had followed him for a decade. Alaric understood the king's need for answers, for closure, but he also worried about what they might find here and what it would do to his king. The forest pressed in close and silent, as if holding its own secrets. They moved in a staggered formation, eyes sweeping, ears straining. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of bark drew their attention. The scent of the forest, once a comfort, now held a hint of wildness, untamed and watchful. Alaric thought of the wild rumors surrounding this place, whispers of a guardian, a creature of the woods. He had dismissed them as folklore, but now, faced with such cunning defenses, he reconsidered. "Careful, men," Alaric warned again, his voice barely a breath. "We are entering the heart of it." He felt a strange pull, a subtle shift in the air pressure, a feeling of ancient power drawing them forward. It was a sensation he had only experienced in places of deep magic or profound significance. This veil was more than just a burial ground, he realized. Suddenly, a sharp snap echoed through the hushed forest. It was the distinct sound of a dry branch breaking underfoot, followed by a low, drawn-out whiz. Alaric's head whipped around, his eyes locking on Thomas, who now stood frozen, one foot suspended in the air. A thin, almost invisible cord tied between two saplings vibrated wildly around his ankle. The sound was not loud, but in the profound silence of the veil, it was a thunderclap. It was a primitive alarm ringing out through the ancient trees, confirming Lyra's worst fears of imminent discovery. Patience was a virtue King Gareth Blackwood rarely possessed. His kingdom demanded swift decisions, unyielding resolve, and a relentless pursuit of truth. For 10 long years, that truth had eluded him, a gaping wound in his soul that festered with each passing season. Now, with the scent of discovery hanging heavy in the air, a restless energy coiled within his powerful frame. Every sinew in his body screamed for action, a primal urge to cast aside caution and rush headlong into the unknown. He had watched his scouts, skilled as they were, move with a deliberate slowness that grated on his nerves. Each cautious step, each careful scan of the undergrowth felt like an eternity. He tasted the damp earth and the sharp tang of pine on the wind, but a different, more compelling scent pulled at him, a subtle floral note entwined with something ancient and wild. It was a scent that resonated deep within his alpha core, stirring an unfamiliar longing, a hunger he could not name. His father, the previous king, had taught him that an alpha always leads, but also that an alpha never rushes blindly into danger. Gareth was a king, but he was also a son. His mother, Lyra, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a silence that had echoed through his childhood and haunted his throne. He had spent a lifetime chasing ghosts, following rumors, tearing through ancient texts, all for a glimmer of understanding. Now a primitive alarm had sounded, a subtle shift in the forest's rhythm. He had felt it, a faint vibration under his boots, a distant echo of a tripwire. His scouts had clearly stumbled upon something, some carefully laid defense. This only fueled his impatience. If there were defenses, there was something to defend. If there was something to defend, there was a secret. And secrets, Gareth had learned, were often the hiding places of truth. He stopped, his silver eyes sweeping over his men, each face a mask of concentration. Lord Alaric met his gaze, a silent question in his steady brown eyes. Gareth merely nodded, a sharp, decisive movement, then melted into the deeper shadows of the forest. He moved like a phantom, his steps silent, his powerful body a blur of controlled motion. The scent grew stronger, an intoxicating blend of earth, rain, and something uniquely feminine, fierce and untamed. It was an enigma, calling to him with an intensity that made his blood hum. He pushed through a thicket of thorny bushes, ignoring the scrapes against his leather armor. The canopy above him began to thin, letting through patches of dappled sunlight. The air here felt different, cooler, softer, as if he had stepped into a different realm. He heard the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of a cuckoo, but also a deep, profound stillness, a reverence that settled over the clearing he was approaching. Then he saw it. It was not a grand mausoleum nor a forgotten crypt. It was a simple stone cairn, ancient and weathered, nestled in a small circular clearing. Wildflowers in shades of purple and white bloomed in profusion around its base, their delicate petals swaying in an unseen breeze. The sun, finally breaking through the dense canopy, bathed the scene in a soft, ethereal glow. A single gnarled oak tree stood guard over it, its branches reaching towards the sky like ancient protective arms. Garrett's breath hitched in his chest, a sharp, painful gasp. The air was suddenly thick with emotion. A profound sense of peace mingled with an ache that resonated deep within his bones. He took a hesitant step forward, his alpha instinct screaming caution, but his heart pulling him closer. He saw the faint, almost erased etching on the largest stone of the cairn. His eyes blurred for a moment, the words swimming before him. He knelt, his powerful frame suddenly feeling heavy, his fingers tracing the worn letters. Elyra. The name, his mother's name, was etched there, a stark, undeniable truth. A decade of desperate searching, of clinging to the hope that she was merely lost, that she would one day return, shattered into 1,000 pieces around him. His mother was not missing. She was here. She was gone. A wave of grief, raw and absolute, crashed over him. His vision swam with unshed tears, burning at the back of his eyes. He squeezed them shut for a moment, trying to reassert his control, his alpha composure. But there was no control in this moment, only a son's agony, a king's crushing failure. His mother, the gentle queen he barely remembered, the warm presence he had longed for, lay beneath these stones. He opened his eyes, the world still shimmering. But suddenly another presence made itself known, a wild, primal energy that cut through his sorrow like a sharp blade. He felt a shift in the air, a subtle vibration that was not of the forest, but of a living, breathing creature. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the edge of the clearing. And there she was. She stood poised at the foot of the ancient oak, half hidden by a curtain of hanging moss and ivy, yet entirely visible to his heightened senses. She was slender, lean, her body a taut bowstring ready to unleash its arrow. Her dark brown hair was a tangled mane, threaded with leaves and bits of bark, framing a face smudged with dirt, yet radiating an untamed beauty. She wore simple furs and leathers, blending seamlessly with the forest around her. Her eyes, they were the color of ancient amber, flecked with gold, and they blazed with a fierce protective fury he had rarely witnessed. They were the eyes of a creature cornered, a guardian defending its sacred ground with every fiber of its being. She held a sharpened stick, its tip aimed directly at his chest, her knuckles white around its shaft. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, a guttural growl vibrating low in her throat, a sound more animal than human. She was wild, untamed, dangerous, and she was guarding his mother's grave. 1,000 questions screamed in his mind. Who was she? Why was she here? How long had she kept vigil over this sacred, sorrowful place? But before any of those questions could fully form, before he could utter a single word, before he could even register the full depth of his grief and confusion, their gazes locked. It was not merely eye contact. It was a collision. A searing electric current shot through Garrett's entire being, originating from the depth of her amber eyes and plunging directly into his soul. It was a jolt so profound, so utterly overwhelming, that it stole his breath, his thoughts, his very sense of self. The world around him faded into a blurry periphery. The forest sounds vanished. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a vibrant, terrifying hum that resonated in his bones. His heart, already aching with sorrow, now hammered against his ribs with a desperate, frantic rhythm, a primal drumbeat echoing an ancient song. A wave of heat, intense and consuming, washed over him, starting in his core and spreading outwards, tingling in his fingertips, burning behind his eyes. It was a heat that brought both exquisite pain and an intoxicating sweetness, a feeling unlike anything he had ever known. He smelled her then, truly smelled her, with every heightened cell of his alpha nose. Not just the faint floral and wild notes, but her essence. A deep, earthy musk mixed with the sweet scent of sun-warmed skin and something undefinably hers. It filled his lungs, his mind, his very being, intoxicating him, claiming him. It was the scent of home, of belonging, of a connection so profound it defied logic, reason, or even belief. Mate. The word exploded in his mind, not a thought, but a primal, undeniable recognition that vibrated through every cell, every nerve ending. It was a guttural roar from his inner wolf, a silent scream of triumphant discovery and bewildered awe. This fierce, wild girl, this guardian of his mother's tomb, was his fated mate, the other half of his soul revealed in a single shattering instant. He watched her face, saw the reflection of his own shock and confusion mirrored there. Her amber eyes widened, a flicker of raw terror replacing the fury. Her hand, clutching the sharpened stick, trembled visibly. A soft, involuntary gasp escaped her lips, a sound of profound distress, of a world irrevocably altered. He could feel her essence, her fear, her defiance, all pouring into him through this nascent, explosive bond. It was an invasion of her solitude, an upheaval of her carefully constructed world. His mind reeled. His mother's grave, his lost mother, the wild girl who protected it, his mate. The pieces spun wildly, refusing to coalesce into a coherent whole. Grief, duty, authority, and this raw, incandescent pull towards her crashed together in a tumultuous storm within his chest. He was King Gareth Blackwood, Alpha of the Blackwood Kingdom, accustomed to absolute control, unwavering purpose. But now all of that was overshadowed by a connection so fundamental, so ancient, that it rendered his titles, his pain, and his very identity secondary. He felt a strange urgency, an instinctual need to bridge the distance between them, to claim this impossible truth. His eyes were still locked with hers, a silent, powerful conversation passing between their very souls. Her terror was palpable, her wildness recoiling from the sudden, overwhelming intimacy of the bond. He saw the flicker of a desperate plea in her eyes, a silent demand for him to retreat, to break this unbearable connection. But he could not. The mate bond, once ignited, was a force of nature, an irresistible tide. His body moved without his conscious command, his muscles coiling, drawing him forward. He was a king, an alpha. But in this moment, he was also a creature driven by the most fundamental imperative of his kind. The raw power of the bond, shocking and utterly undeniable, compelled him. He took an involuntary step forward, his authority warring with an unfamiliar, instinctual pull towards the fierce girl who guarded his mother's tomb. A searing current tore through Lyra, igniting every nerve. It felt like a soul-deep invasion, ripping open her solitude. The world blurred, the ancient trees of the Whispering Vale swayed. Her amber eyes, usually sharp, burned with heat. He stood there, this tall stranger, his silver gaze burning into her. The connection felt like a brand, searing her essence. A guttural snarl ripped from her throat, raw defiance. This bond, this overpowering pull, threatened everything she was. She would not be claimed. She would not be tamed. Lyra launched herself forward, a blur of motion fueled by instinct. Her hands, hardened by survival, became claws. Her movements were swift, honed by countless battles. Gareth stood firm, absorbing her furious attack. The mate bond, still thrumming with intensity, warred with his alpha instinct to dominate. He knew he could not harm her, yet she was a whirlwind of ferocity, striking with desperation. Her nails raked his forearm, drawing thin lines of crimson, but he barely registered the pain. His focus was entirely on her, on the tempest in her amber eyes, on the potent scent that now defined his world. He moved with controlled power, deflecting her blows, parrying her attempts to disengage. Each touch sent a jolt through them both. A silent recognition Lyra fought with every fiber. She twisted, ducked, and tried to slip past him, her cunning evident. But Gareth was the Alpha King, years of battle etched into his reflexes. He was larger, stronger, driven by primal need and regal authority. His hands, surprisingly gentle for their immense strength, caught her wrists, then her waist. He pinned her against him, holding her firm, allowing no escape. Her body was rigid with resistance, trembling with a fury that vibrated through him. He felt her heart hammering against his chest, a frantic drumbeat mirroring his own. Her wild scent of damp earth and pine filled his senses. Let me go, she hissed, her voice a low growl, strained. She bucked against him, a desperate, futile struggle. He felt fine tremors, a mix of rage and something akin to fear. Her head snapped back, eyes meeting his, and in their depths, he saw a flicker of untamed spirit. He understood this was not just a fight for dominance, but a battle for her solitary freedom. Gareth held her gaze, trying to convey a message beyond words. I will not hurt you. His own mind reeled, making sense of this impossible reality. This fierce Omega, fighting him with primal force, was his fated mate. The universe had chosen her, and she was here in this secluded vale guarding something sacred. He pressed her gently but firmly against the ancient stone cairn. Her struggles intensified for a moment, then stilled, finding herself trapped. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her eyes, still blazing with defiance, darted around, searching for an escape that was not there. It was in that moment, with her pinned against the weathered stone, that his gaze finally fell upon the cairn's surface. His silver eyes, previously fixed on her, now found the inscription. The letters were old, worn smooth, partially obscured by moss, but they were there, painstakingly carved into the rock. 4 letters. A name. His heart, already in a maelstrom of emotions, seized in his chest. A cold dread, deeper than any battle fear, spread through him. He moved one hand, releasing her wrist, and traced the faint lines with a trembling finger. ELARA. The world tilted. The air left his lungs in a sudden, violent rush. The scent of pine and damp earth, once grounding, now felt suffocating. The buzzing of insects became a deafening roar. All the years of searching, the endless patrols, the agonizing hope that had kept him going, they shattered around him. Alara, his mother. She was not missing. She was not captive. She was here, buried beneath this simple ancient stone cairn. All this time, a decade of tireless, desperate searching, and she had been here, in the quiet embrace of the earth. The realization was a crushing weight. His grip on Lyra slackened, his powerful hands falling away from her. The mate bond, which moments before had thrummed with fiery recognition, now pulsed with a chilling, hollow ache. It mirrored the cavernous emptiness that had just opened in his soul. He stumbled back a step, his silver eyes wide with shock and grief, fixed on the name, unable to tear away. Lyra, released from his hold, did not flee. She watched him, her breathing still ragged, her amber eyes now clouded with a strange mix of wariness and understanding. She saw the powerful Alpha King, who had just tried to claim her, crumble before her eyes. She saw the strength drain from his frame, leaving behind a man utterly broken. A low, guttural sound escaped Gareth's lips, a mournful gasp of untold pain. He reached out a hand, not to Lyra, but to the weathered stone. His fingers traced the letters again, as if to convince himself they were real. The coldness of the rock seeped into his skin, a chilling confirmation of his worst fears. His mother was dead, and this fierce, wild Omega, now undeniably linked to his soul, had been protecting her grave. For how long? He had scoured the continent, chasing ghosts and whispers, while Lyra stood vigil. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. A wave of profound sadness washed over him, threatening to buckle his knees. The strength he had wielded, the authority that defined him, evaporated, leaving him vulnerable. He felt a tear, hot and stinging, track a path down his cheek. It was a sensation utterly foreign to him. He had not cried since his mother vanished. Lyra watched him, her gaze unwavering. She saw the tremor in his hands, the deep lines of sorrow etching onto his sharp features. The fury that had driven her moments before began to ebb, replaced by a quiet, unsettling empathy. She had seen grief before, in forest creatures, in the hollow cries of the wind. But this, from a man so powerful, was a raw wound. He sank to his knees beside the cairn, his head bowing low. His large shoulders, usually proud, slumped under an invisible weight. He muttered her name, a broken whisper that seemed to echo through the stillness of the vale. Alara. The scent of his despair, thick and heavy, filled the air. Lyra felt an inexplicable pull, a strange warmth unfurling in her chest. It was the mate bond, no longer a searing brand of invasion, but a soft, insistent thrum of shared pain. It was confusing, infuriating even, but undeniable. She wanted to rage at him for his intrusion, yet a part of her wanted to reach out. She remained still, a statue of watchful wilderness, her own heart a tangled knot of conflicting emotions. The bond was a chain, but also a window, allowing her to feel the crushing weight of his sorrow, the depth of his loss. It was a terrifying revelation, to be so intimately connected to the grief of one she had just fought. Gareth stayed there, kneeling by the grave for what felt like an eternity. The sun, once high and bright, began its slow descent, casting long shadows. The air grew cooler, carrying the familiar scent of evening forest. He drew a deep, ragged breath, slowly pushing himself back to his feet, his movements stiff. He turned to Lyra, his silver eyes, though still clouded with grief, now held in intense focus. He saw her, truly saw her, guardian of his mother's resting place and his fated mate. The two truths, one devastating, one bewildering, intertwined in his mind, creating a tangled web of duty, sorrow, and an undeniable pull. You, he said, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. He didn't finish the sentence, but Lyra understood. You knew, you protected her. The unspoken words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and grudging respect. Lyra met his gaze, her jaw set. She had no words, no explanations to offer. How could she say she had found the grave years ago and felt an inexplicable duty to watch over it? That the old queen had become a silent companion in her solitary life. Words would only betray the quiet reverence she held. He took a step towards her, then another. The mate bond surged again, a demanding presence that seemed to weave together the sorrow and the recognition. He reached out a hand, not in aggression, but in a gesture desperate and commanding. He needed to touch her. He needed to feel the physical confirmation of their impossible connection. Lyra flinched, pulling back instinctively. Her wild nature screamed at her to flee, to disappear into the twilight. But something held her. The strength in his eyes, the raw vulnerability beneath the alpha's facade, and the undeniable pull of the bond itself. She felt a tremor run through her, a battle between her feral independence and this new, terrifying connection. I cannot leave you here, Gareth said, his voice gaining a new resolute edge. Not now, not ever. It was a king's command, but also a mate's promise. He saw the flicker of panic in her amber eyes, the renewed tension in her frame. He knew she would fight him again, but he could not allow it. He needed answers. He needed to understand everything, and he needed her. He moved swiftly, decisively. Before Lyra could react, before she could launch another furious attack, he was on her. He scooped her up into his arms, a sudden, powerful motion that left her breathless. She was light, surprisingly so. Her body stiffened in his embrace, her hands pushing against his chest, her feet kicking uselessly. Let me go, she cried, her voice sharper, a desperate plea mixed with a threat. She thrashed, a wild thing caught in a snare, her strength considerable but no match for his. He held her firm, tucking her head against his shoulder, ignoring her struggles. He felt her fierce heart thrumming against him, the hot breath of her protest against his neck. The weight of his mother's death, the shock of finding her grave, and the bewildering reality of his mate bond all converged into a single, overwhelming certainty. Lyra had to come with him, to the Blackwood Citadel. She held too many keys, too many answers, and she was his. He began to walk, carrying her effortlessly through the dense undergrowth, away from the stone cairn. Lyra continued to struggle, her protest growing fainter, her movements less frantic as she realized the futility. The mate bond, a complicated current, flowed between them, binding their fates in a way neither fully understood. As they emerged from the deepest part of the vale, Gareth heard the familiar rustle of movement, the hushed whispers of his men. Lord Alaric, his beta, stepped forward from the shadows of the ancient trees, his face etched with concern. He had followed Gareth, a loyal shadow. Alaric's eyes widened, first in surprise at the sight of his king carrying a struggling, wild-haired girl, then in confusion. His gaze flickered from Lyra's defiant face to Gareth's grim, grief-stricken expression, then to the fresh scratches on Gareth's arm. He opened his mouth, a question forming on his lips, but Gareth cut him off with a single, firm shake of his head. She comes with us, Alaric, Gareth commanded, his voice deep and resonant with authority. He looked at Lyra, held fast in his arms, her eyes now wide with fear in a desperate, silent plea. His heart ached, a complex knot of sorrow and an unbearable sense of new purpose. He knew this decision would change everything, for him, for her, and for his entire kingdom. The Blackwood Citadel air was heavy, thick with aged stone and unfamiliar spices. It pressed down on Lyra, stifling her breath, a stark contrast to the clean air of the Whispering Vale. A cold seeped into her bones, different from the forest's chill. Every sound echoed, amplified by high ceilings. Her ears rang with distant armor and voices. This place felt like a vast, breathing tomb. Gareth had placed her in a chamber, not a dungeon cell, yet it felt the same. The large room featured heavy tapestries depicting ancient hunts and a massive bed with soft furs. A small, narrow window high up showed only a sliver of sky, framed by thick stone. It was too high to reach, too small to squeeze through. The solid oak door, reinforced with iron, locked with a click she heard from outside. A cage, she knew, did not always need iron bars. Lyra traced the rough texture of the wall, searching for any weakness. A loose stone, a hidden crevice. Her eyes, accustomed to discerning deer trails, scanned every inch. The silence, once the distant clamor faded, was unnerving. It spoke of being trapped, of isolation. She missed the forest's constant symphony, the rustle of leaves, chirping crickets, the hoot of an owl. Here she heard only her own blood thrumming. A tray of food appeared on a small table by the door. A servant placed it there, avoiding her gaze. The smell was rich, almost cloying. Meat, bread, fruit she did not recognize sat on it. Her stomach growled, a primal protest, but she distrusted it all. She would not eat until she understood. Her instincts screamed danger, seeing even the soft bed and offered food as a lure, not a sanctuary. She began her exploration methodically. The door was the most obvious exit. She pressed her ear against it, listening for movement beyond. Nothing. She pushed, kicked, even threw her shoulder against the solid wood, but it held firm, mocking her efforts. Her wild strength, honed by years of survival, felt useless against the king's fortress. A whimper of frustration escaped her lips, quickly stifled. Sound was a weakness here. The mate bond, an invisible tether, tightened and loosened with a maddening rhythm. It was a constant, low thrum beneath her skin, a peculiar ache in her chest that had not been there before. When Gareth was near, it intensified, a jarring pulse that stole her breath and sent a strange heat through her veins. She hated it. She hated this alien connection that bound her to the man who had stolen her freedom, who had taken her from the grave she vowed to protect. He had visited her briefly. His silver eyes, usually sharp and cold, held a flicker Lyra could not name. It made the mate bond pull with painful urgency. He spoke in a deep, resonant voice. He told her this was for her safety, that he would explain everything, that she was not a prisoner. But his words felt meaningless. His presence alone was a threat to her independence, a suffocating blanket on her wild spirit. "You are safe here, Lyra," he had said, his voice softer than she expected. "No one will harm you." She merely stared at him, her amber eyes blazing defiance. Safety meant open sky, rustling trees, the ability to run. This was not safety. This was a gilded cage. "You do not understand," she had finally rasped, her voice hoarse. "I am not meant for walls." He had sighed, a heavy sound carrying the weight of his crown. "You are meant for me." The words sent a shockwave through her, a conflicting mix of anger and a strange, unwanted tremor. She turned away, unable to bear his intense gaze or the confusing turmoil within herself. Hours crawled by. She measured time by the shifting shadows on the wall, by the distant chimes of a bell she did not understand. Her attempts to escape became more desperate, more primal. She tested every stone in the fireplace, every loose seam in the tapestries, every floorboard. She tried to pry open the small window with her bare hands, scraping her knuckles raw against the unyielding rock. The cold, hard reality of her situation settled heavier with each failed attempt. Her omega instincts, usually her guiding force, became a source of agony. They screamed for freedom, for wide-open spaces, for the scent of pine and damp earth. But they also responded to the mate bond, pulling her towards Gareth, demanding acknowledgement of a connection she desperately rejected. It was a war within her own body, a cruel betrayal. Her heart felt torn between two opposing forces. One urged her to fight, to tear down these walls, to bite and scratch her way back to the wild. The other, a soft, insidious whisper, spoke of an unexpected longing, a strange sense of belonging that terrified her more than any predator. She began to pace like a caged animal. Her movements were fluid and restless, but with nowhere to go. The space felt enormous, yet constricting. Her muscles ached not from exertion, but from the coiled tension within her. She was a spring wound too tight. With no release, she imagined the trees outside, tall and proud, unburdened by human constructs. She pictured the familiar scent of the river, the moss under her bare feet. The memory was a torment. Alaric, the king's beta, sometimes brought her food. His eyes were kind, but they held a watchful glint, a silent reminder that she was always observed. He tried to speak to her, to offer comforts. "The king means you no harm, Lyra," he would say, his voice calm and steady. "He is only trying to understand." Lyra would only stare at him, her silence a wall. What was there to understand? She was wild. She belonged to the forest, to the grave she had sworn to protect. This opulent prison held no answers for her, only questions she did not want to face. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of restless pacing, futile escape attempts, and the constant, throbbing awareness of Gareth. When he was in the citadel, she felt his presence like a physical weight, a warmth spreading through her chest that she fought with every fiber of her being. When he left, a strange emptiness settled, a hollow ache that made her jaw clench. This bond was a curse, a chain forged not of iron but of spirit. One afternoon, a new wave of desperation washed over her. She had found a loose stone in the corner of the fireplace. With renewed vigor, she attacked it, prying at the mortar with her fingernails, tearing at it with the few tools she could fashion from a discarded meal. Her fingers bled, her nails broke, but the stone refused to budge more than a fraction. It was a futile effort, a child's game against an ancient fortress. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes, hot and stinging, a weakness she rarely allowed herself. She cried then, silent, racking sobs that shook her lean frame. The tears flowed freely, wetting her sun-kissed cheeks, a release of the pent-up fury and despair. She missed the freedom more than she could express. The forest had been her sanctuary, her provider, her everything. This place took everything and gave nothing but gilded walls and a bewildering, unwanted connection. The mate bond flared, a sudden intense pulse that startled her. It was as if Gareth, wherever he was in the vast citadel, felt her anguish. A strange, comforting warmth spread from her chest, countering the cold fear in her belly. She recoiled from it, shaking her head. No, she would not accept this. She would not allow herself to be swayed by this foreign sensation. This was just another trick of the cage, another way to weaken her resolve. She pounded her fists against the stone walls. A primal scream caught in her throat. Her body ached for release, for movement, for the simple act of running until her lungs burned. But there was nowhere to run. She was trapped, a wild bird with clipped wings. The humiliation of her captivity, the sheer helplessness, gnawed at her spirit. She felt smaller here, weaker. Gareth came to her chamber often. Sometimes he stood outside the door, his presence a heavy thrum through the mate bond. Other times he would enter, and the air would thicken with unspoken tension. He never pushed her, never threatened. He simply observed, his silver eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Are you well, Lyra?" he would ask, his voice a low rumble. She never answered. What was well? Being trapped was not well. Being forced into a bond she did not understand was not well. "I know this is difficult for you," he continued once, stepping further into the room, "but I cannot let you go, not yet." The words were a brutal confirmation of her fears. He would not release her. He saw her as something to be kept, something to be controlled. The mate bond, which pulsed with increasing fervor at his proximity, felt like a betrayal from within. Her sleep was fractured. haunted by dreams of the whispering veil. She saw herself running free, felt the wind in her hair, smelled the damp earth. Then the dreams would shift. The trees would turn to stone. The sky would shrink to a sliver. Gareth's eyes would be watching her from every shadow. She would wake with a carping, her heart pounding, the phantom ache of the mate bond a dull throb in her chest. She refused the clothes they offered her, soft silks and fine linens. She clung to her worn leathers and furs. Their familiar scent was a small comfort in the overwhelming alienness of her surroundings. They represented her palm, her identity, everything she was losing within these walls. The citadel felt like it was slowly stripping away her essence, replacing it with the dull monotony of captivity. Her spirit, however, was not easily broken. Despite the despair, a flicker of defiance remained. She would not give up. She would find a way out. She just had to think, to observe, to use her instincts against this new, formidable enemy. The king was powerful, but she was cunning. The forest had taught her that. It had taught her patience, resilience, and the art of waiting for the right moment. But the waiting was unbearable. The mate bond, however, was her most potent enemy. It whispered of things she did not want to hear, sensations she did not want to feel. It was a constant presence, pulling, aching, demanding her attention. It was a warmth that felt like a burning fever, a longing that felt like a weakness. It made her question her own desires, blurred the lines between her will and this strange new imperative. It was a part of her now, whether she wanted it or not, and it was slowly, agonizingly wearing her down. One evening, after another failed attempt to pick the lock with a shard of bone she had managed to acquire from a discarded meal, she slumped against the heavy oak door. The wood was cold against her back, a tangible symbol of her imprisonment. Her body ached. Her mind was a whirlwind of frustration and despair. The weight of her situation, the sheer impossibility of escape, settled upon her like a shroud. She closed her eyes, tears once again tracking paths down her dirty cheeks. A deep, profound ache resonated in her chest, a phantom limb where the mate bond pulled at her. It was a yearning, a confusing emptiness that made no sense. This body, her body, was betraying her, reaching out for the very person who held her captive. She felt utterly bewildered by this internal conflict, by her own body's confusing, unwanted betrayal. The mate bond pulsed, a silent, powerful rhythm against her broken spirit. The mate bond thrummed under Gareth's skin, a relentless pulse that mirrored his own frantic heart. It settled within him the moment his eyes met Lyra's. This new sensation was a torment, a miracle, a fierce pull defying his logic. He was a king, unyielding and solitary. Now a wild Omega girl, his captive, filled his thoughts, a raw ache in his soul. Citadel walls felt like a tomb, amplifying his conflict. His mother, Lyra, lay in a forgotten grave, guarded by his fated mate. The irony tasted bitter. He paced his chambers, boots rasping on stone. Lyra's amber eyes, blazing with fury and sorrow, haunted him. He saw terror there, the fight of a cornered animal, and it twisted something inside him. He was a king, a grieving son, an alpha bound to a woman he barely knew. The mate bond called, a siren song of solace and danger. He tried to focus on kingdom duties, on scrolls and decrees, but her face appeared in torchlight, her defiant snarl in the wind's whisper. He reached for a phantom touch, a yearning born of instinct. He needed answers from her, not advisors or maps. He needed to understand the girl guarding his mother's rest, the woman anchoring a storm within him. He would not go as king with guards or threats. He would go as a man, desperate to unravel their tangled fate. He pushed open his chamber door, old wood and cold stones sending the air. He stepped into the quiet corridor. The vast citadel corridors did not deter him. Each step brought him closer to his turmoil's source. The air grew heavy near Lyra's chamber, thick with the tension pulsing between them. He felt her presence before he saw the door, a faint flicker on his senses. He paused, hand hovering over the cold handle. No sound came from within, only the building's quiet hum. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, to shed his kingly mantle. The mate bond surged, an insistent whisper urging him forward, promising something vital. He pushed the door open slowly, hinges groaned. The chamber was dimly lit, an oil lamp casting shadows on stone walls. Cool air carried her wild scent, a mix of damp earth and pine. She huddled in a corner, far from the bed, knees drawn up. Her dark hair fell around her face. Simple leathers provided by his staff seemed ill-fitting, too clean. She looked smaller here, more vulnerable, stripped bare. Her head snapped up at the door sound. Amber eyes, usually fierce, widened with caution, like a trapped animal. They locked onto his. The mate bond flared, a sharp ache in his chest mirroring her fear. He felt regret for her captivity. He stepped inside, closing the door softly, the click echoing too loudly. He did not approach, respecting her boundary, his powerful frame filling the small room. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, rough, stripped of authority. He watched her fingers tighten on her tunic. He saw the tremor in her jaw, her flinch. She did not speak, her gaze unwavering, assessing him for aggression. He tasted her fear, mingled with a defiant spark. He wanted to tell her he meant no harm, but words meant little to instinct. He had to show her. The mate bond pulled, a steady thrum, reassurance and burden. It spoke of connection, but their circumstances mocked it. He shifted, trying to appear less imposing, less the king who had captured her. His eyes swept over her disheveled state, the dirt on her cheek, the fierce pride burning despite despair. Then he saw it, a glint of tarnished silver around her neck, hidden beneath her tunic. It was a locket, small and ancient. His breath hitched. He had seen its like before, in faded portraits, in childhood memories. A hazy image surfaced, his mother Lyra, holding a similar piece, her fingers tracing the intricate engraving. His mother had worn a locket with the Blackwood family crest, a crescent moon entwined with a wolf's head. His gaze fixed on the silver. Blood drained from his face, cold gripped his stomach. "The locket," he whispered, urgent, his voice losing its measured tone. "Where did you get that locket?" Lyra's eyes narrowed, suspicion darkening their amber depths. Her hand flew to her neck, covering the locket. She clutched it, knuckles white. She looked ready to bolt, muscles tensing. The mate bond flared, a sharp, painful jolt, making his heart race. She did not answer, her lips a thin, defiant line. He had startled her, perhaps frightened her more. He cursed his lack of subtlety, but the locket had ripped his composure. It was too familiar, too resonant with the past he sought. "Please," he urged, stepping forward hesitantly, his voice softening. He bared a vulnerability rare for him, especially to a captive. But this was his mother. "That belonged to my mother." He saw surprise flicker in her eyes, quickly masked. She clutched the locket, her gaze darting between his face and the silver. Her breathing was shallow. She tried to read him, to discern his intent, her wild instincts working. He sensed her inner turmoil, the conflict of distrust in the mate bond's confusing pull. A battle raged within her, its echoes within him. He swallowed, forcing himself still, giving her space. He extended his hand, open and empty, a gesture of peace. "The engraving," he continued, his voice strained. "The crescent moon and the wolf's head. It is the Blackwood crest. It was hers." The words hung heavy, weighted with longing and sorrow. He watched her, his silver eyes fixed on the locket, on her protective hand. Anguish, a raw pain, transcended his authority. Lyra's gaze searched his face, her sharp senses picking up the tremor in his voice, the raw grief. She saw genuine pain in his eyes, a sorrow echoing her own loneliness. This was not the ruthless king, but a man stripped bare, vulnerable. She had guarded that grave, honored the woman within. Now her son stood before her, his grief as potent as her devotion. The mate bond, confusing, acted as a conduit, giving her a glimpse into his soul. Her grip on the locket loosened, fingers still resting on it. She lowered her gaze to the tarnished silver disc. "I found it," she whispered. Low and raspy, barely audible. It was her first offered information, the first crack in her defenses. "Near the grave. Buried." His heart lurched. "Buried?" he asked, hoarse, brow furrowed. "How deep?" He took another cautious step, drawn by their fragile communication. She lifted her eyes, a hint of softness, a glimmer of understanding. Not deep, she clarified, quieter but firmer. It was meant to be found, hidden under a stone near the head of the grave. Her fingers traced the engraving. I found it when I was young. I have always protected it. She did not elaborate, but the unspoken message was clear. She felt its significance, its connection to the veil's silent guardian. Emotion washed over Gareth. This wild girl, his mate, had protected his mother's grave in this intimate piece of her past. He felt profound gratitude, warmth mingled with grief. He saw her devotion, her quiet reverence, and it chipped away at the image of the savage captive. He extended his hand again, closer, his fingers trembling. May I see it? She hesitated, amber eyes searching his, weighing her fear against his pain, her distrust against their bond's pull. Silence stretched thick with unspoken feelings. Slowly she unclasped the thin silver chain. Her fingers brushed his as she placed the locket into his palm. The metal felt cool, heavy with age, strangely comforting. His fingers closed around it, a tangible link to his lost mother, a bridge to his bewildering present. He held the locket carefully, his thumb tracing the crescent moon and wolf's head. It was his family crest, unmistakable. He remembered his mother's gentle hands, toying with a similar locket in thought. A faint scent of old rosewater seemed to emanate from the silver, a ghost of her presence. A tear stung his eyes, a sensation he hadn't allowed in years. His throat tightened. He swallowed hard. He turned the locket, examining its familiar design. His mother loved such intricate pieces. His gaze fell on a tiny, almost invisible line along the side. He remembered her telling him once that true secrets hide in plain sight. He pressed his thumb against the faint line, a forgotten memory stirring, a fleeting image of her fingers pressing a similar spot. A faint click sounded, so quiet he almost missed it. The locket, once solid, revealed a tiny seam. A small, hidden compartment sprang open, hinged at the top. Inside lay a folded piece of ancient, brittle parchment, so thin and carefully folded it was almost missed. He gasped softly, the sound reverberating. Lyra watched him, eyes wide with curiosity and dawning understanding. She had protected the locket, worn it close, but never known its deepest secret. Gareth's hands trembled as he carefully extracted the tiny paper. It was yellowed, edges frayed, ink faded to sepia. He unfolded it with utmost care, fearing it would crumble. The parchment rustled softly, a whisper from the past. He held it to the oil lamp's dim light, his eyes straining to read cryptic symbols in unfamiliar script. It was not common tongue nor any language he recognized. It was a coded message, its meaning just out of reach, a secret whispered across years by his lost mother. The tarnished silver locket lay open on the heavy oak table, a tiny window into a past Gareth had long mourned. Inside its hidden compartment, the faded, coded message seemed to mock him, a cruel whisper from his lost mother. The scent of old paper and dust hung in the air of his private study, mingling with the faint, earthy smell that clung to Lyra. She sat opposite him, her posture rigid, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape that was not there. He could feel the mate bond thrumming between them, a low, persistent vibration beneath his skin, a stark contrast to the silence that filled the large cavernous chamber. Gareth ran a gloved finger over the tiny, intricate symbols Alara had scrawled. They were unlike any script he recognized from the Blackwood archives, a puzzle he had no key for. He had spent hours already, turning the locket, holding the parchment to the light, comparing symbols to ancient runes, but nothing yielded. Frustration coiled in his gut, tight and bitter. He was a king, accustomed to swift answers, to subjects who obeyed. This, however, was his mother's voice, silent and stubborn, refusing to yield its secrets. He felt the weight of his crown, the burden of his kingdom, pressing down on him, and the chilling thought that his mother's death might have been more than just a tragic loss deepened the lines on his brow. Lyra watched him, her amber eyes narrowed slightly, betraying a cautious curiosity. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the clenching of his jaw. He was a predator held captive by a scrap of paper, and a strange, unfamiliar amusement flickered within her arm. But beneath that, the mate bond pulled, a silent plea for her attention, for her engagement. Her fingers locked around the smooth surface of the oak table, the wood cold beneath her touch. She wanted to be anywhere but here, yet a part of her, a deep, instinctual part, was drawn to the mystery, to the faint echo of the woman she had protected even in death. She could feel the subtle energy radiating from the locket, a quiet hum that spoke of profound secrets. "These symbols," Gareth finally said, his voice a low rumble, "they are foreign to me. I have consulted every ancient text in the Citadel, but nothing matches." He pushed the locket slightly towards her, a gesture of concession he rarely made. "Do you recognize any of them?" He knew it was a foolish question. Lyra was a wild Omega, not a scholar. Yet her fierce connection to the land, her intuitive understanding of things beyond logic, made him ask. Lyra leaned forward slowly, her movements fluid and cautious. She did not touch the locket, but rather peered at the tiny script, her head cocked to one side. The scent of old metal and Alara's faint, lingering essence drifted up to her. Her gaze traced the faint lines, not just seeing the shapes, but feeling their rhythm, their intent. She saw swirls that mimicked the winding roots of ancient trees, angles that mirrored the jagged peaks of far-off mountains, dots like scattered stars. These were not just letters, they were fragments of a language spoken by the earth itself. "They are not for reading," Lyra whispered, her voice a low, husky sound that surprised even herself. "They are for feeling." Her hand hovered over the locket, not quite touching, yet sensing the patterns. Gareth watched her, captivated by the intense focus in her eyes, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. He felt a strange warmth spread through him, a sense of rightness, as if this was exactly where she belonged, beside him, solving this impossible puzzle. The mate bond throbbed, a silent affirmation of their shared purpose. He cleared his throat, pushing aside the sudden rush of feeling. "What do you mean for feeling?" His tone was clipped, authoritative, a mask over his vulnerability. Lyra finally reached out, her calloused fingertip barely brushing the tarnished silver. A shiver ran through her, a faint echo of the locket's past. "The flow," she said, her voice softer now, almost a murmur. "They connect, not in words but in sequence, like the hunt. One track leads to the next." She pointed to a cluster of symbols at the top. "This is a beginning, a question." Her finger moved to another, a swirling spiral. "This is a journey, a path taken." She looked up, her amber eyes meeting his. For a fleeting moment, their gazes locked, and the world outside the small study seemed to fade away. His silver eyes held a raw intensity, a yearning she found both frightening and strangely compelling. Her heart gave a sudden, unexpected lurch within her chest, a wild thing caught in a snare. Gareth found himself leaning closer, drawn in by her quiet conviction. The mate bond intensified, a silent conversation passing between them that transcended words. He felt the brush of her scent, wild and untamed, and a primal urge to protect, to claim, surged through him. He fought it back, forcing his attention to the locket. "A question and a journey," he repeated slowly, trying to process her unusual interpretation. "How would one feel the sequence?" Lyra hesitated, then took a deep breath. "The locket itself," she explained, her voice gaining a quiet confidence. "It holds the memory. If you hold it, truly hold it, you can feel where the strength of the message lies." She gently pushed the locket into his palm, their fingers brushing for a moment. An electric spark, sharp and quick, jolted through both of them. Gareth's breath hitched. Lyra pulled her hand back as if burned, a flush rising on her cheeks, her heart now pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She hated this visceral reaction, this betrayal of her own will. Gareth's hand clenched around the locket, the metal warm from her touch. He could still feel the phantom sensation of her skin against his. He closed his eyes, focusing on the locket, trying to push past his own preconceived notions. He pictured Alara, her gentle smile, the way she used to hum a lullaby. He thought of her hands, tracing these very symbols, imbuing them with her essence. He felt a subtle pressure, a direction in the arrangement of the symbols. It was not a physical sensation, but an intuitive pull, exactly as Lyra had described. He opened his eyes, a flicker of surprise in their silver depths. "There is a path," he confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "A faint current guiding the eye." He followed the invisible thread Lyra had pointed to, moving his finger across the tiny parchment. And it changes here. He indicated a small, almost invisible indentation. A change in direction, a turning point. He looked at Lyra, a silent question in his eyes. The path is broken, Lyra agreed, her gaze fixed on the spot. A hidden danger, perhaps, or a choice that had to be made. She felt a strange sense of empathy for the queen she had never known, a connection forged in the silent defense of her resting place. The gravity of their task pressed down on her, pushing away some of her initial fear and resentment. This was important, not just for the king, but for the memory of the quiet, strong woman who lay beneath the stone cairn. For hours, they worked in a strange, uneasy harmony. Gareth, with his disciplined mind, tried to match Lyra's intuitive leaps to known lore and historical events, while Lyra, with her untamed senses, guided him through the emotional landscape of the message. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending dancing shadows across the heavy tapestries that adorned the walls. The air grew cooler as night deepened outside, and the scent of wood smoke became more pronounced. They found themselves leaning closer, their heads almost touching as they deciphered a particularly convoluted passage. Lyra pointed to a symbol that looked like a broken chain, her breath warm against his ear. "This speaks of an oath," she murmured, her voice soft. "Broken or perhaps hidden." Gareth felt a jolt of awareness, not just from the proximity, but from the sudden clarity her words brought. An oath, a pact. He quickly scanned the symbols around it, remembering old tales of forgotten treaties between the Blackwood kings and neighboring tribes. A pact with the northern clans, he speculated, his mind racing. They were once close allies, but contact ceased abruptly centuries ago. He felt a shiver of unease. Why would Alara be concerned with such an ancient, forgotten alliance? As they continued, more fragments emerged, like pieces of a shattered mirror slowly reassembling. A recurring symbol resembling a hidden spring appeared often. Lyra recognized it as a marker for concealed knowledge, or a secret bloodline. "This isn't about land," she said, tracing the symbol with a gentle finger. "It is about something deeper, something flowing beneath the surface." She glanced at Gareth, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding. A lineage, a hidden one. Gareth felt a cold dread seep into his bones. A hidden lineage. His mother had been meticulous about royal records, every Blackwood ancestor accounted for. The thought of a hidden branch, especially one she seemed to be protecting, sent a chill down his spine. Could it be a threat to his own claim, or perhaps a vulnerability within his family line? He pushed down the rising panic, forcing himself to focus. The mate bond between them was a steadying force, a silent promise of support, even if unspoken. The message grew increasingly frantic towards its end, the symbols more jagged, more desperate. Lyra could almost hear the urgency in Alara's mental voice, a desperate plea for understanding. A sequence of symbols that suggested a choice, a sacrifice, repeated itself multiple times. And then, a stark, terrifying image. A serpent coiled around a blossoming rose, its fangs dripping venom. This, Lyra understood instinctively, was a grave danger. Not just a threat, but a betrayal. Gareth, following Lyra's intuitive guidance, began to piece together a coherent narrative, one far darker than he had ever imagined. The Forgotten Pact was not merely historical. It was a living covenant, tied to a specific bloodline Alara had sought to protect. The hidden lineage was connected to this pact, and its exposure would destabilize the delicate balance of power in the region, perhaps even within the Blackwood kingdom itself. The serpent symbol, Lyra explained, wasn't just danger, it was treachery, a poisonous force working from within. "She knew," Gareth whispered, his voice hoarse, the words barely audible. He looked at the locket, his mother's last message, her desperate attempt to warn him. She knew of a threat, a betrayal that involved a hidden lineage and a forgotten pact. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his mind reeling. The implications were staggering. Alara had not simply disappeared, lost in the wilderness, or fallen ill. She had been protecting something monumental. Lyra nodded slowly, a profound sadness settling over her. She had spent years guarding a grave, feeling the silent presence of the woman buried beneath the earth. Now she understood the weight of that responsibility. Lyra had been more than a queen. She had been a guardian herself, protecting a secret that could unravel everything. The silence in the study was no longer merely tense. It was heavy with the weight of revelation. The flickering fire cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to twist into menacing shapes on the walls. A particular cluster of symbols, almost obscured by a smudge, caught Lyra's eye. It depicted a closed mouth, a single tear falling from an eye. She was silenced, Lyra breathed, her voice barely a whisper. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The quiet strength she had always sensed from Lyra was not just fortitude, it was the strength of one who bore an unbearable secret, one who had been forced into silence. Gareth's head snapped up, his silver eyes wide with a terrifying clarity. Silenced, he repeated, the word a bitter taste on his tongue. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying finality. His mother's supposed disappearance, the lack of a body, the rumors he had dismissed as whispers of fools, all now coalesced into a chilling truth. She had not died a natural death. She had been made to disappear, to be forgotten, to protect whatever dangerous truth lay hidden within her message. The locket was not just a relic of grief, it was a testament to betrayal, a cry for justice from beyond the grave. His hands balled into fists, his knuckles white against the dark wood of the table. A cold, stark realization dawned upon them, heavy and undeniable. Queen Lyra might not have simply died, but was silenced to protect a truth that still threatened the Blackwood line. The Blackwood citadel, usually quiet, now held a tang of unease. Whispers like dry leaves followed Gareth. His new mate, Lyra, in his mother's grave fueled hushed discussions. The truth about Queen Lyra's fate and Lyra's connection to it spread like poison through the kingdom. Gareth felt the shift. Lesser lords wavered, their greetings clipped. Rival pack leaders sent veiled challenges. His alpha senses, already stretched by grief for Alara and Lyra's presence, registered every tremor. He stood in his war room, a map spread across the oak table, tracing borders. Lord Alaric stood beside him, a stack of dispatches in his hand. Lord Bramwell of the Southern Marches has recalled his patrols, Alaric reported. He claims a local squabble requires his full attention. Gareth's jaw tightened. Bramwell had always been ambitious, his loyalty easily swayed. The scent of betrayal was almost palpable. Local squabble, Gareth echoed, Bust, a cold edge to his voice. More likely he sees an opening. Alaric nodded, worry in his eyes. Alara's burial, coupled with your unexpected mate, has unsettled them, my king. They see it as a vulnerability. Gareth clenched his fists. He had expected doubt, but not such swift exploitation. He thought of Lyra, in chambers that felt like a gilded cage. He felt the insistent thrum of their mate bond, a connection that both confused and comforted him. This wild girl ignited his core, yet threatened his kingdom's stability. Frustration coiled in his gut. He was a king accustomed to control, but now the ground beneath him shifted. Lyra found the citadel a suffocating labyrinth. The stone walls felt like a tomb. The clatter of armor, muffled shouts, and rich smells assaulted her senses. She paced her chambers, soft carpets alien beneath her bare feet. Her amber eyes, usually sharp, felt dulled by the lamps. She heard the whispers too, the fear, distrust, and judgment in the voices that carried through the thick doors, though she understood perfectly. They were like growls of a pack ready to turn on a lone wolf. She was an outsider, observed with disdain. A shiver of unease traced her spine. The mate bond, an aching presence, pulled at her, a strange tether to the stern king. It was a connection she fought yet could not sever. She ran her fingers over the cool stone windowsill, longing for bark and damp earth. Days bled into monotonous confinement. Gareth visited, sometimes speaking of Alara's message, sometimes sitting in silence. In those moments, the mate bond would surge, a silent language between them. Then he would leave, and Lyra would be alone, the walls pressing in. One evening, as the sun dipped below jagged peaks, a frantic urgency erupted. A guttural cry echoed, followed by clattering swords and panicked shouts. Lyra sprang to her feet. The air thickened with a new smell, fear, metallic and acrid, like distant smoke and spilled blood. Her hackles rose. This was a scent of danger she knew well. She rushed to the window. Below, the courtyard was a hive of activity. Grim-faced soldiers armored themselves. Lord Alaric barked orders. Gareth appeared, striding through the case, his face etched with a fury Lyra had not seen. He moved with coiled tension, hand already on his sword hilt. From the guttural words and frantic gestures, Lyra understood. An attack. A border outpost, far north, called the Whispering Peaks. She focused her senses, trying to understand the threat. Alarm bells began to toll, a deep clang reverberating through the stone. They hit the northern watchtower, Alaric reported to Gareth. A surprise raid. Lord Torvin sends word a large force attacked under darkness. They burned supplies and pushed deep before his men could rally. Gareth slammed his fist onto a table, his silver eyes blazing. Who dares? He growled. Scouts returned with strange markings, my king, Alaric continued, unrolling a crude drawing. An old symbol not seen in generations, the serpent's fang. Gareth's eyes widened. The serpent's fang, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, but they were wiped out centuries ago. Lyra watched from above, her heart pounding. The citadel's fear seeped into the stone. This was not contained danger, but a threat to an entire pack. A strange instinct stirred within her, surging with new purpose, like guarding her territory. She watched Gareth issuing commands, his voice sharp. His people looked to him with fear and desperate hope. In that moment, something shifted within Lyra. The mate bond, once a chain, now felt like a conduit, a shared heartbeat, a deep connection to this man and his people. She saw the weight of his kingdom. Gareth remembered the Serpent's Fang legends, a ruthless sect banished centuries ago. Alara's coded message hinted at resurfacing threats. This attack was a declaration. Gather the war council, Gareth commanded, his voice tight. Send riders to Lord Torvin. Reinforce the northern watchtower immediately. He turned to Alaric, eyes blazing. Double the guards around Myra's chambers. This enemy will strike where they perceive weakness. Lyra flinched, pulling back from the window. He still saw her as a vulnerability, to be caged. Anger mingled with hurt, spread through her. She was not weak. She was a survivor, a hunter. Her fingers tightened around the windowsill. She scanned the courtyard, seeking a path to the forest, a path to the fight. Her wild instincts screamed. This pack was under threat. The mate bond pulsed, a primal connection. She had lived alone, fiercely independent, but now a strange protectiveness bloomed in her chest. It was unsettling yet powerful. She saw a young, trembling guard and an old woman clutching a child. An unfamiliar ache settled in Lyra's heart. These were Gareth's people, and they faced danger. A low growl rumbled in her throat, a sound of defiance. Her muscles tensed, senses sharpened, focusing on distant conflict. She tasted the fear on the wind, the scent of burning wood. Gareth, in the war room, felt a subtle shift in the mate bond. It was now a focused intensity. He glanced toward Lyra's chambers, knowing she sensed the fear, but unable to imagine her reaction. He discussed strategy with Alaric. The Serpent's Fang are known for stealth, Gareth explained. They strike from unexpected angles. Their strength is cunning and terror. He drew a line across a forested region. They will cut our supply lines and push towards the capital. A dusty messenger burst in. My king, Lord Torvin reports the enemy uses strange traps. They captured scouts. They seek something from the Busterant. Gareth's gaze darted to Alaric. Alara's secrets, he murmured. They know. They are coming for what she protected. The realization hit him. Lyra had vanished to protect the kingdom from this enemy. The key to defeating them lay in her coded message, still unsolved. Lyra, unable to stand by, slipped from her chambers. She moved silently through the citadel, finding a high, hidden archway overlooking the courtyard. From her perch, she watched Gareth preparing for war, his voice powerful. His men showed apprehension and resolve. Her inner wolf stirred with a protective urge. She saw the map, recognizing the northern border's wild terrain. Her knowledge of such lands, like her Whispering Vale, was unmatched. She knew its hidden paths and defenses. A sharp cry pierced the air from the watchtower. Riders approaching! From the northeast! Serpent's Fang banners! Panic flared. Gareth knew this was a direct advance, not a skirmish. Lyra's breath caught. The enemy was closer, bold. Her heart hammered. A fierce anger ignited within her. They dared to threaten him? Her hand went to Alara's locket. She had protected Alara's grave from trespass. This was a greater desecration. She watched Gareth bark commands, his voice like thunder. Form defensive lines! Prepare the archers! Alaric, take the eastern flank! He moved swiftly, gathering his sword and shield, radiating raw power as an alpha protecting his pack. Lyra's gaze locked on Gareth. His silver eyes held fierce determination. The mate bond surged, pulling her toward him and the danger. Her mind raced. She saw a weak point in the wall, easily scaled. She knew the land beyond the walls, its cover and ambush points. Her wilderness wisdom clicked. This was her world, her mate, her pack. The thought, my pack, resonated, a profound sense of duty to defend what was hers. Her muscles coiled, her amber eyes scanned the approaching enemy, their serpentine banners and glinting steel. They were a formidable force. A fierce growl escaped her. She would not be caged. A wolf fought for its pack. A primal urge to protect Gareth in this home consumed her. Her heart pounded with warrior's resolve. Gareth saw the full threat. The serpent's fang, more numerous than expected. Dread became anger. He would not let them threaten his lands or claim Alara's secrets. Surveying the grim scene, Gareth caught a flash of movement. He saw Lyra's dark hair and intense amber eyes in an archway. He had expected her to cower or flee, but her stance showed readiness, not fear. Her posture was taut, her eyes fixed on the enemy with fierce intensity. It was the primal fire he knew, now a protective warrior spirit. A shiver ran down his spine. The mate bond thrummed with shared purpose. He saw her wildness as a potent strength, a weapon his kingdom needed. Pride and clarity washed over Gareth. He had underestimated her, and himself. The air in the Blackwood Citadel tasted of dread and urgency. Gareth's pronouncement that Lyra's wildness was a weapon hung heavy in the council chambers. He had called for immediate tactical discussion. Lyra, standing before the king's advisors, felt the unfamiliar weight of their stares. Her skin prickled with unease, a primal warning against so many contained, judging eyes. She preferred the honest scent of the forest floor to this polished stone. Lord Alaric, always the voice of reason, spoke first. He asked about the invaders' numbers and their likely approach. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, letting her omega senses extend beyond the thick walls. She could not see them, but she could taste their intrusion on the wind. The forest hummed with their alien presence. They are many, she stated, her voice a low growl, too many for a direct fight at the border. Her gaze met Gareth's. He had trusted her, even when others clearly doubted. That trust was a fragile thread, but it was there. They moved like seasoned hunters, not a rabid pack. Gareth nodded, his silver eyes fixed on her. He had felt the truth in her words already, a certainty only a true alpha could recognize. The scent of distant fear, the subtle tremble in the earth. These were things Lyra felt more keenly than any scout. She could read the land like a book. Where are they now? Gareth asked, his voice calm but with an edge of command that made the guards in the room straighten. Lyra walked to a large map spread across the table. Her fingers, stained with earth from years of tending her secret, traced paths through dense woods. She pointed to a narrow pass, rarely used, overgrown and treacherous. They will try this way. It avoids the main roads. They think it is unseen. A grizzled captain scoffed softly. That path is impassable, girl. No army could traverse it. Lyra turned her piercing amber gaze on him. An army of men, perhaps, but these are wolves accustomed to the wild. They will use the cover. They will move at night, Idat. Her voice held a quiet authority that silenced the captain. She knew this for certain. The whispers of the forest told her. Gareth watched her, a flicker of something raw and powerful in his eyes. He saw the fire in her, the absolute confidence born of pure instinct. His mate bond thrummed, a silent confirmation of her unwavering perception. She was not guessing. She was simply knowing. We will meet them there, Gareth declared, turning to his advisors. Lyra will lead the vanguard. A collective gasp swept through the room. Lord Alaric looked concerned but remained silent. The other lords exchanged uneasy glances. To trust a wild, unproven Omega? A woman with such a critical military decision? It was unheard of. Lyra felt their disbelief like a cold wind. She ignored it. Her focus was on the forest, on the enemy. She led them out at dusk, a silent column of Blackwood warriors, their armor a dull gleam under the fading light. The air grew colder as they plunged into the deeper woods. Lyra moved like a shadow, her bare feet silent on the fallen leaves and pine needles. She felt the vibrations of the earth, the shift in the breeze, the subtle scent of foreign bodies carried on the wind. Gareth walked close behind her, his own senses heightened, but still a step behind her primal awareness. He watched her, captivated. She was in her element here. Her tangled hair, usually a wild frame for her face, seemed to blend with the shadows. Her movements were fluid, graceful, yet utterly purposeful. He saw the land through her eyes, suddenly understanding its hidden language. Lyra stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. The warriors behind them froze. She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring. The scent of damp earth, of quinine, of their own pack, now mingled with a faint metallic tang. Blood, and something else, a hint of something foreign, unsettling. She pointed to a cluster of ancient, gnarled oaks. An ambush point, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They will be waiting there, thinking they are hidden. Her eyes scanned the dense undergrowth, finding the almost invisible signs of disturbance. A broken twig, a disturbed patch of moss, a faint imprint in the soft soil. The others saw nothing. Gareth trusted her implicitly. He signaled to Lord Alaric, who began to deploy archers to flank the suspected position. Lyra moved on, her senses stretched taut, like a bowstring about to release. She led them through a winding, barely discernible deer trail, a path only the wild things knew. The Blackwood warriors, despite their initial skepticism, followed her without question, their trust growing with each silent, precise movement. They circled wide, coming up behind the enemy's hidden position. Lyra gave a silent signal, a low whistle like a night bird. The Blackwood archers let loose a volley of arrows, catching the invaders entirely by surprise. A fierce, short skirmish erupted. The enemy, disoriented and exposed, quickly fell. It was a swift, decisive victory, achieved without a single Blackwood casualty. A ripple of awe passed through the royal guard. They looked at Lyra with new eyes, their previous doubts replaced by a stunned respect. Lyra, however, did not linger. She was already moving, tracking the remnants of the enemy, predicting their retreat, their next move. The fight was not over. Not yet. They continued for hours, Lyra guiding them through the moonlit forest. She pointed out places where the enemy would rest, places where they would try to cross a river, places where they would leave a scout. Each time Gareth's warriors were ready, turning the invaders' own tactics against them. Lyra moved through the skirmishes like a phantom, her hunting knife a blur of silver. She was not a trained fighter in the Citadel style, but her movements were primal, efficient, deadly. Every strike was precise, aimed at a vital point, a lifetime of hunting prey translating seamlessly to combat. She fought with a quiet ferocity, her amber eyes burning with an intense focus. She did not waste movement. She did not hesitate. Her wildness, once a source of suspicion, was now her greatest weapon. She was part of the forest, an extension of its untamed spirit, striking with the swiftness of a wolf. Gareth watched her. He fought alongside his men, his own alpha strength overwhelming, but his gaze kept returning to Lyra. He saw her dispatch 3 enemies with a fluidity that took his breath away. Her lean frame twisted and turned, evading blows, delivering precise, devastating counterattacks. She bled, a shallow cut on her arm, but she barely seemed to notice. Her adrenaline surged, fueled by the raw protective instinct of the mate bond. He felt the connection to her, deeper and stronger in this shared crucible of battle. It was not just the physical pull, the instinctive desire. It was a profound understanding of her spirit, her unwavering strength, her loyalty. He saw the respect, bordering on reverence, growing in the eyes of his seasoned warriors. They had followed a wild girl into the heart of the enemy, and she had led them to victory. As the last pockets of resistance were broken, a strange quiet descended upon the forest. The air still hummed with the aftershock of violence, the scent of blood and fear slowly dissipating with the night wind. Lyra stood panting slightly, her knife still clutched in her hand. Her face was streaked with dirt and a smudge of blood, but her eyes were clear, bright with the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of protection. She looked around, surveying the fallen, the scattered weapons. Her pack was safe. Her new complicated pack was safe. A deep, unfamiliar contentment settled in her chest, a warmth she had not known since her mother's touch. She had fought for them, and they had fought beside her. Gareth approached her, his heavy boots crunching on the forest floor. His face was grim, but his silver eyes held a light she had never seen before. It was a look of complete, unburdened respect. He extended his hand, not a kingly gesture of command, but a simple, open offering. Lyra hesitated for a moment, her wild instincts still wary. But the mate bond thrummed, a gentle insistence this time, not a demanding pull. She met his gaze, and in that silent exchange she saw past the Alpha King, past the grief-stricken son, to the man who truly saw her, not as a wild omega to be tamed, but as a formidable force in her own right. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and utterly solid. A shiver ran through her, not of cold, but of something deeper, something profoundly reassuring. It was a silent promise of partnership, of shared burdens, of a future she had never dared to imagine. The sun began to rise, pointing the sky with streaks of crimson and gold. The victorious Blackwood warriors slowly began to gather, their faces tired but triumphant. They had seen their king fight like a true alpha, and they had seen his wild mate fight like a force of nature. Lyra released Gareth's hand, but their eyes remained locked. His gaze swept over her, taking in her bruised knuckles, the cut on her arm, the exhaustion etched into her features. Yet she stood tall, an undeniable presence. He saw his kingdom's future in her, not just a queen but a protector, a warrior, a wisdom forged in the heart of the wild. Lyra felt the profound silence between them, filled with unspoken words. It was an acknowledgement that transcended the raw, instinctual pull of their mate bond. It was the birth of something deeper, something earned through shared struggle and the undeniable proof of her worth. Across the bloodied field, Gareth's eyes met hers, a profound, unspoken acknowledgement passing between them that transcended their mate bond. The scent of old parchment and the metallic tang of ink filled the quiet chamber, a stark contrast to the raw, wild air Lyra normally breathed. Gareth's finger traced the lines of the decoded message, his jaw tight, his silver eyes cold as winter ice. The locket lay open between them, its tarnished silver now seeming to hum with forgotten secrets, a beacon in the dim light filtering through the high archway. Lyra sat beside him, her own gaze fixed on the ancient script, not understanding the words but feeling the tremor that ran through Gareth's hand, a silent language of burgeoning rage. His heart beat a heavy rhythm. Lyra felt deep within her own chest, a sympathetic ache of anger and profound betrayal. Lord Alaric stood nearby, his face etched with a grim understanding that had slowly unfolded over hours of painstaking work. He spoke, his voice low and solemn, confirming the words Lyra could not read. "It is as we feared, my king. The treachery runs deeper than simple ambition." Lyra felt the skin crawl on her arms as the full weight of the revelation settled into the room. Alara's own brother, Prince Caspian, was the architect of her suffering, the one who orchestrated her removal from the throne. Not her death, but her imprisonment in the grave that had become Lyra's sanctuary. Gareth slammed his fist onto the heavy oak table. The sound cracked through the silence like a bolt of lightning, making Lyra flinch, though not from fear. It was the shock of his raw fury. His voice, usually a deep, controlled rumble, now vibrated with unrestrained power. Caspian, my mother's own brother. He dared to touch her, to imprison her, to steal her life for his wretched greed. Lyra watched the muscles tense in his neck, the way his knuckles whitened. A dark, primal growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that spoke of a king's outrage and a son's profound agony. He had spent years searching for his mother, believing she was lost, longing for her return. Now he understood she had been closer than he ever imagined, suffering a fate worse than death, all at the hands of family. The thought was a bitter poison. Lyra felt a hot wave of protectiveness surge through her. She reached out, her fingers brushing the back of Gareth's hand. He did not pull away. The brief, silent touch was a grounding force, a shared understanding of pain and a promise of retribution. Alaric placed a steadying hand on Gareth's shoulder. He believed she held the key to an ancient power, a lineage he coveted. He wanted to claim it. King Gareth, and your mother would not allow it. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of generations of secrets and the cold ambition of one man. Lyra's amber eyes narrowed. She had always known the grave held more than just Alara's body. It was a secret, a purpose, a shield. Gareth rose from the table, his chair scraping loudly across the stone floor. His movements were precise, dangerous. He will answer for this. His voice was low, but each word was laced with lethal intent. Lyra felt a shiver of anticipation and dread. She understood this kind of anger, this deep-seated need for justice. It was the same fury that had propelled her through the wilderness, protecting her territory against all threats. The citadel was a hive of controlled chaos as Gareth prepared to confront his uncle. The clatter of armor, the sharp commands of captains, the hurried whispers of guards moving through the vast corridors created a cacophony Lyra found both unsettling and exhilarating. Her senses, accustomed to the subtle rustle of leaves and the distant cry of an owl, now processed 1,000 different sounds, each one a clue to the impending storm. She saw the hardened faces of the Blackwood warriors, their determination mirroring Gareth's. The air hummed with anticipation, thick with the scent of polished steel, damp stone, and the underlying tension of impending conflict. Gareth found Lyra by an arrow slit, her profile stark against the gray light of dawn. Her eyes scanned the distant mountains, perhaps searching for the familiar contours of her old home. He approached silently, his footsteps muffled by his heavy boots. "Are you ready, Lyra?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been all morning. She turned, her gaze meeting his, direct and unwavering. "I am ready," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "My fight is with him too, for Ilara." Gareth saw the resolve in her eyes, the untamed spirit that would not bend. He knew with an absolute certainty that she belonged by his side, not just as his mate, but as his queen, his warrior. A fleeting moment of warmth passed between them, a silent promise in their shared glance. He offered his hand. She took it, her grip surprisingly strong, her palm rough against his. The mate bond thrummed, a steady, comforting pulse that momentarily overshadowed the coming battle. The grand hall of the Blackwood Citadel was a place of imposing power. High vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadows, and massive tapestries depicting ancient victories hung from the stone walls. Torches blazed in sconces, casting flickering light that danced across the stern faces of Gareth's most trusted guards. Prince Caspian stood in the center of the hall, flanked by a handful of his own loyalists who were outnumbered and surrounded. He was a man of striking, almost regal appearance, with cold, calculating eyes that held no warmth. His raven hair, so similar to Gareth's, was slicked back, revealing a cruel smile that played on his lips. "Nephew," Caspian began, his voice dripping with false pleasantness, "this is an unnecessary display. I am merely here to offer counsel." Gareth stepped forward, Lyra a silent, formidable presence at his side. Her hand instinctively rested on the hilt of the hunting knife at her belt. "Your counsel is not required, Caspian. Your treachery has been exposed." Gareth held up the locket, the silver glinting in the torchlight. "My mother's words, from her grave. She tells a different tale." Caspian's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his features. His eyes darted to Lyra, then back to Gareth. The wild girl found the trinket? How quaint. His dismissive tone only fueled Gareth's rage. "A fitting guardian for a forgotten queen, I suppose, but her words are meaningless." "They speak of your ambition," Lyra interjected, her voice cutting through the tension. It was quiet, but it resonated with an unexpected authority that made Caspian pause. "They speak of your greed and of Alara's suffering." Lyra's eyes, usually amber, seemed to burn with a fierce golden light. Caspian's gaze sharpened, a venomous glint entering his eyes. "You understand nothing, savage. Alara was weak. She hoarded power, a power that could have made this kingdom invincible. The ancient bloodline, the whispers of the earth itself flowing through her veins. She sealed it away, fearing its true potential. A fool protecting secrets that could have made us squeeze. His voice rose, filled with a crazed conviction. She stood in my way. I sought only to guide this kingdom to its true destiny, to unlock the power she selfishly guarded. Gareth's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. The truth in all its bitter ugliness was laid bare. You imprisoned my mother, condemned her to a slow demise, simply because she would not bend to your warped vision of power. His voice was low, trembling with restrained fury. The image of his kind, gentle mother, confined and alone, fueled a fire in his soul. Lyra felt his pain, a sharp, piercing ache in her own heart. She saw the tears welling in Gareth's eyes, quickly blinked away, but they were there. Caspian merely laughed, a cold, unfeeling sound that echoed through the hall. She chose her path. A queen must be pragmatic, not a sentimental guardian of ancient, useless traditions. I offered her a place in my new order. She refused. He gestured with a disdainful hand. Now give me the locket. It is the key to what she tried to bury. Never kickin', Gareth snarled, drawing his sword with a rasp of steel. The sound was sharp, decisive. His guards followed suit, their weapons drawn, ready for battle. Lyra shifted, her hand closing around her knife. She would not let him touch Alara's legacy. Not now, not ever. The mate bond thrummed with a fierce unity, a shared intent to protect. Caspian's eyes narrowed, a cold fury replacing his arrogance. So be it. With a swift, unsettling movement, he raised his hand. A dark, shimmering energy began to coalesce in his palm, the air crackling with an unnatural chill. You choose defiance, Gareth. You choose death. The hall erupted. Caspian's few remaining loyalists, fanatics fueled by his twisted vision, lunged forward, swords drawn. Gareth met them with the strength of an alpha king, his blade a blur of silver. He moved with a practiced grace, each strike powerful and precise, felling one attacker after another. His roars of command echoed through the hall, galvanizing his loyal guard. Lyra did not hesitate. Her movements were fluid, instinctive, a dance perfected by years of survival in the wild. She was a whirlwind of controlled aggression, her hunting knife a deadly extension of her arm. She moved low, striking with speed and precision, bypassing the heavy armor of the guards. She twisted, ducked, and weaved, her every action driven by a primal need to protect Gareth, to protect Alara's memory. The mate bond surged with every shared movement, every glance they exchanged across the chaotic battle. The fight was intense, a brutal clash of steel and magic. Caspian, too, was a formidable opponent, his dark magic swirling around him, deflecting blows and sending guards stumbling backward. He moved with a cold efficiency, his eyes always on Gareth, his true target. Lyra saw a flicker of raw power, a dangerous light in his gaze, reminding her of the ancient tales of dark magic that whispered through the forests. Gareth fought with a ferocity born of grief and betrayal, his face a mask of grim determination. He was a king leading his men, but also a son avenging his mother. Lyra, meanwhile, was a force of nature. She anticipated movements, her senses honed by countless hunts. She moved through the fray like a shadow, taking down Caspian's loyalists with silent, swift strikes. Her focus was absolute, her loyalty unwavering. She saw the strain on Gareth's face, the slight tremor in his arm, and pushed herself harder, faster. As the last of Caspian's loyalists fell, the hall grew quiet, save for the heavy breathing of the remaining guards and the ringing in Lyra's ears. Only Caspian remained, his dark magic crackling around him, his face contorted in a sneer of desperate rage. He was cornered, his ambition thwarted, his power slipping away. His eyes, full of malice, locked onto Gareth. You may have won this skirmish, nephew, Caspian spat, his voice laced with venom. But you have not won the war. The power will be mine. He gathered all his remaining energy, his body tensing, the dark magic swirling faster and brighter around him, coalescing into a single devastating surge. It was a desperate, final spell, aimed with deadly accuracy straight at Gareth's chest. A sudden, chilling premonition ripped through Lyra. She saw the raw, destructive power building, saw Gareth, momentarily distracted by the defeat of the last loyalist, turned back towards Caspian. There was no thought, no hesitation, only instinct. A guttural roar tore from her throat, a primal sound of absolute defiance and unyielding protection. She moved in a blur, throwing herself forward, directly into the path of the oncoming, deadly magical surge. She met it head-on, a living shield for her mate, for her king. The impact was immediate, brutal, and searing. The world fractured into shards of blinding white and searing black. Lyra felt a crushing weight, a silent scream trapped in her chest as the magical force tore through her. Her body became a conduit for pure, agonizing energy, every nerve aflame. Then, nothing, just a deafening roar in her ears, a roaring that sounded like Gareth's voice. He caught her as she fell. Her weight was limp, a terrible stillness that froze the blood in his veins. The antagonist, a sneering shadow, was immediately seized by Lord Alaric and the remaining guards. Gareth paid them no mind. His world had shrunk to the broken form cradled in his arms. Her skin felt too cold, then too hot, flickering between extremes. He saw the faint shimmer of residual magic clinging to her, a venomous residue. Lyra, he breathed, the name a desperate prayer. His hands moved, pressing against the wound, a dark, spreading stain on her simple tunic. A raw, animalistic growl tore from his throat. His alpha instincts screamed for him to heal, to mend, to force life back into her. He poured his essence into her, a desperate torrent of his own life force. He pushed and pushed, feeling the drain on his own body, but it was nothing compared to the fear that gnawed at him. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, a fragile whisper against the chaos. Her amber eyes were closed, their fierce light dimmed. He held her tight, his cheek pressed against her hair, smelling earth and wild herbs and the faint coppery tang of blood. He could not lose her. Not now, when everything was finally clear, when her wildness had proven to be his kingdom's salvation. The mate bond, usually a vibrant hum, was a frantic, desperate pulse, a plea for life. Lord Alaric approached, his face etched with grim concern. My king, she needs the healers, now. Gareth shook his head, his gaze locked on Lyra. No, my healing, it is stronger. It must be. He felt the magic in her resist his own, a stubborn, foreign barrier. His power pulsed, a relentless river against a stone dam. Each breath she took was a small victory, a tiny spark against the encroaching darkness. He could feel her fighting deep within the haze of pain, her innate resilience battling the magic's insidious hold. Hours blurred into an agonizing eternity. The clang of armor, the cries of battle, the antagonist's final defeated snarls, all faded into the background. Only Lyra mattered. He carried her back to the citadel, ignoring the stunned faces of his guard, ignoring the whispers. He laid her gently on the royal bed, the soft furs a stark contrast to her dirt-smudged skin. He sat beside her, never letting go, his hand pressed firmly against her side, channeling his alpha power. Healers came, their faces grave as they examined her. They offered poultices, tinctures, ancient incantations. Gareth allowed them, but he did not release his hold. He knew with a primal certainty that his own connection to her, the very bond that had brought them together, was her strongest chance. He felt the cold touch of fear whenever her breath faltered, the surge of desperate hope when it deepened, however slightly. Her omega scent, usually a subtle undertone of freedom and earth, was now sharp with pain and vulnerability. He breathed it in, a desperate anchor in his terror. He remembered her fierce eyes, her untamed spirit, the way she had looked at him on the battlefield, not as a king, but as a warrior. He remembered the protective roar she had given, the way she had thrown herself in front of him without a moment's hesitation. That raw, selfless act had sealed something in his heart that had been broken for too long. Outside the chambers, Lord Alaric had already secured the treacherous relative. The kingdom was safe. The threat, at least for now, had been neutralized. The whispers of Alar's true fate began to spread. Alaric, ever loyal and pragmatic, ensured the truth was told, not hidden. He spoke of Queen Alar's foresight, her wisdom, her desperate sacrifice to protect not just her son, but the very essence of the Blackwood lineage. The decoded message from the locket was laid bare for all the council to see. Alara had uncovered an ancient pact, a hidden vulnerability in the kingdom's magical wards that her family generations ago had unwittingly created. The only way to safeguard it was through a blood sacrifice, a self-imposed exile, and the creation of a hidden grave. She had allowed herself to be perceived as missing, presumed dead, to draw the power of the ancient wards, creating a magical shield around the kingdom. Her grave, tended by Lyra, had been the anchor for this protection. Her disappearance had not been a weakness, but an immense act of strength. Her choice had protected the kingdom from the very threat that the estranged relative had tried to exploit. The artifact or lineage she protected was not a physical object, but the Blackwood line itself, imbued with a latent magic that, if unprotected, could be used to unravel the kingdom from within. Lyra unknowingly had been the silent guardian of this profound legacy. Gareth listened to the reports, to the somber recounting of his mother's incredible selflessness, but his focus never truly left Lyra. He pictured his mother, gentle yet fiercely determined, making such a monumental choice for her people, for him. A profound wave of respect and grief washed over him, but it was now tinged with understanding, even pride. Alara was not just a lost queen, she was a hero whose final act had ensured their survival. He realized then that Lyra too was a guardian, not just of a tomb, but of a legacy, of a future. Her fierce protectiveness was a mirror of Alara's own. The cold stone walls of the Blackwood citadel seemed to warm with this new truth. The ancestral secrets, once shrouded in fear, now shone with wisdom. The kingdom had been secured, not just by steel and might, but by the quiet sacrifices of two extraordinary women. The hours bled into a new day. Outside, the sun rose, painting the mountain peaks in shades of orange and gold. Inside, the quiet struggle continued. Garrett's body ached with exhaustion, but he refused to yield. He felt a slight tremor in Lyra's fingers, a subtle shift in her breathing. His heart pounded with a frantic rhythm. He leaned closer, his voice a rough whisper. "Lyra," he said, his hand still pressed against her. "You fought. You saved us. You saved me." He spoke of the forest, of her strength, of the way she moved like a shadow and fought like a storm. He spoke of the hidden veil, of the grave she had protected. He spoke of the mate bond, raw and undeniable, a current that now ran through his very soul. He felt a faint stir, a flicker. Her eyelids trembled. He held his breath, his whole being focused on her. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft brush of their breathing. He saw a faint blush of color return to her pale cheeks. The oppressive weight of the foreign magic began to recede, defeated by the combined force of her will and his relentless alpha healing. Then slowly her eyes fluttered open. They were amber, still hazy with pain and exhaustion, but they held the spark of life. Her gaze, unfocused at first, slowly found his. A profound, silent recognition passed between them. He saw weariness, but also a fierce light returning. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. He waited, his breath held captive. His hand, still covering her side, felt a soft, deliberate movement. Her trembling fingers, fragile and hesitant, reached out. They found his hand, warm and calloused, and settled over it. It was a light touch, yet it resonated through him, a jolt of pure, unadulterated emotion. There was no hesitation, no fear, only acceptance. In that single, quiet gesture, an unspoken promise passed between them, deeper than any vow. The scent of pine and rich earth, once Lyra's constant companions, now mingled with the sterile tang of healing herbs and the heavy perfume of the royal chambers. Weeks had passed since the battle, since the searing pain had claimed her, since Gareth's desperate touch had anchored her to life. Her body, though still bearing the phantom ache of a wound that had nearly stolen her breath, was strong again. Yet the deep comfort of the soft bed, the warmth of the roaring fire, and the silent vigil Gareth kept at her side felt both alien and profoundly right. She often watched him as he worked, his brow furrowed over parchments, his silver eyes sharp with concentration. He was a king, burdened by a crown, but in these quiet moments, he was simply Gareth, the man whose touch sent shivers through her, the alpha whose presence settled the wild unrest within her. The mate bond, once a source of confusing resistance, now hummed between them, a steady, comforting rhythm. It was a silent language, a constant reassurance that she was not alone, not anymore. One evening, as the last light of dusk painted the citadel windows in hues of violet and rose, Gareth turned from his desk. He found Lyra watching him, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. A soft smile, rare and genuine, touched his lips. He moved to her, settling on the edge of the bed, his hand gently finding hers. Her fingers, once accustomed only to the rough hide of her bow or the mossy texture of the forest floor, now responded to his warmth with a startling tenderness. "You are quiet tonight," he observed, his voice a low rumble. Lyra's gaze drifted to the window, to the distant, dark line of the forest. "It is strange," she admitted, her voice still carrying the slight rasp from her ordeal. "This place, it is so loud, even when it is silent. So many stones, so many voices, even in the walls." Gareth squeezed her hand. "You hear the echoes of generations. The citadel has stood for centuries. It has seen many queens." Her gaze snapped back to his, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "Queens, I am not like them. I know nothing of court, of rules, of being inside." He chuckled softly, a sound that rarely escaped him before Lyra. "That is precisely why you are perfect, my mother Alara. She taught me that strength is not always found in stone walls or ancient decrees. Sometimes it blossoms in the wild, in the untamed spirit." Lyra's heart fluttered at the mention of Alara. The queen's memory now bound them in a way deeper than even the mate bond. "She must have been a fierce spirit," Lyra mused, picturing the graceful woman from the locket. "She was," Gareth confirmed, a shadow of sorrow passing over his features. "And she would have adored you. She would have seen the wisdom in your wildness." The days that followed were a blur of lessons and quiet moments. Lord Alaric, ever patient, guided Lyra through the intricacies of court etiquette, the lineage of noble houses, and the responsibilities of a queen. Lyra, though often exasperated by the stiff corsets and formal dances, absorbed it all with a resilience that surprised even Alaric. She learned not just the rules, but the subtle currents of power, the unspoken alliances, and the quiet fears of the people. Her instincts, honed in the wilderness, proved remarkably adaptable to the human jungle of the court. She found her own ways to connect. She spoke to the stable hands, learning the names of the horses. She listened to the women in the kitchens, hearing their worries about harvests and their children. Her directness, initially unsettling to some, began to earn respect. She did not pretend to be something she was not. She was Lyra, the wild Omega who had fought for her king, and she would be queen on her own terms. One afternoon, a delegation from a neighboring pack, long hostile to the Blackwood Kingdom, arrived. Gareth braced himself for the usual posturing and veiled threats, but Lyra, sensing the underlying tension, stepped forward. Instead of formal greetings, she spoke of the shared hunting grounds between their territories, of the health of the deer herds, and the necessity of balance. She spoke of the hard winter and the resilience of their people, not as Blackwood subjects, but as fellow survivors of the wild. The visiting alpha, a grizzled old wolf named Thane, watched her with narrowed eyes, accustomed to Gareth's stern authority. But Lyra's words, devoid of pretense and full of a raw, earthy truth, disarmed him. She spoke of the forest as a mother giving life to all, and of the foolishness of sons fighting over her bounty. By the time the meeting concluded, Thane was not just nodding in agreement, but smiling. He had found an unexpected kindred spirit, a queen who understood the language of the earth. Gareth, watching Lyra that day, felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the roaring hearts of the citadel. She did not just lead, she connected. She did not just rule, she nurtured. His kingdom, once a fortress built on strength and fear, was slowly becoming a home, tended by a woman who had once guarded a single grave with fierce devotion. The time came for them to return to the Whispering Vale. It was a journey Gareth had both longed for and dreaded. He had not visited his mother's grave since the day he found it, since the day Lyra had thrown herself in front of him, protecting it from his grief-fueled rage. Now they rode together, Lyra not on a wild pony but on a fine mare, her dark hair still braided simply, but her leather armor replaced by riding silks. As they approached the vale, the air grew cooler, imbued with the familiar scent of damp earth and pine. Lyra's breath hitched. The familiarity was a balm to her soul, a homecoming she had not known she yearned for. The trees embraced them like old friends, their ancient boughs rustling a silent welcome. When they reached the clearing, Lyra dismounted, her boots sinking slightly into the soft moss. The stone cairn, Alar's resting place, was no longer overgrown. It was tended, not just by nature, but by human hands. Fresh wildflowers bloomed around its base, crimson and gold against the gray stone. A small, carved wooden wolf, Alar's symbol, rested gently on top. It was clear that Gareth had ensured his mother's grave was treated with the respect due a queen, even in this wild, hidden place. Gareth stood beside Lyra, his hand finding the small of her back, a silent anchor. He watched Lyra approach the grave, her movements fluid and graceful, a reverence in every step. She knelt, her fingers tracing the etched name, Alara. A single tear, unbidden, tracked a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow, not entirely, but of profound peace. Her long vigil had ended. Her queen, her protector, was finally at rest, honored and remembered. "She would like this," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The flowers, the quiet. She would know she was loved. Gareth knelt beside her, placing a hand on the cold stone. His own grief, once a raw, consuming fire, had softened into a steady ache, tempered by understanding and gratitude. "Thank you, Lyra," he said, his voice husky, "for protecting her, for giving her this peace, for giving me this." His gaze met hers, silver meeting amber, a universe of shared history and unspoken promises passing between them. They spent hours in the Vale, not speaking much, but simply existing in the quiet reverence of the place. Lyra felt the earth beneath her, the whisper of the wind through the leaves, and the strong, reassuring presence of Gareth beside her. The boundaries between her wild past and her royal future blurred and dissolved. Here she was simply Lyra, a woman who had found her purpose, her home, and her heart. The return to the Citadel marked a new beginning. Gareth and Lyra, now king and queen, began to rule the Blackwood Kingdom together. Her wild wisdom, once deemed an anomaly, became an invaluable asset. She championed sustainable hunting practices, ensuring the forest remained abundant. She established tribunals that valued truth and instinct as much as precedent and law, bringing justice to many who felt forgotten. Gareth, once rigid in his traditions, learned to listen, to adapt, to see the world through Lyra's eyes. He saw the strength in empathy, the wisdom in humility, and the power in truly connecting with his people, not just ruling them. Their bond, forged in grief and battle, deepened with every shared decision, every quiet evening spent by the fire, every stolen glance that spoke volumes. The kingdom flourished under their combined leadership. The Blackwood Citadel, once a stern, imposing fortress, began to feel like a living, breathing heart of a thriving land. The people, initially wary of their wild queen, came to adore her fierce loyalty, her unwavering honesty, and her surprising tenderness. They saw how she softened their king, how she completed him, and how together they built a future stronger than any had imagined. One crisp autumn morning, Gareth stood on the highest battlements of the Citadel, Lyra's hand firmly in his. The sun was rising, painting the vast valley below in strokes of gold and crimson. The fields were ripe with harvest, the river snaked silver through the landscape, and the distant forest, Lyra's first home, stood sentinel, dark and ancient. His gaze swept over the bustling marketplace, the smoke curling from cottage chimneys, the laughter of children echoing from the training grounds. He remembered the years of lonely searching, the relentless pursuit of a ghost, the emptiness that had settled deep within him. He had sought his mother, and in doing so, he had found Lyra. He had found not just a queen for his kingdom, but the very heart of his future. He had found a partner whose wild spirit had not just tamed his own, but had made it whole. He squeezed Lyra's hand, a silent promise hanging in the crisp morning air, a future as vast and bright as the sunrise before them. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The scent of pine and rich earth, once Lyra's constant companions, now mingled with the sterile tang of healing herbs and the heavy perfume of the royal chambers. Weeks had passed since the battle, since the searing pain had claimed her, since Gareth's desperate touch had anchored her to life. Her body, though still bearing the phantom ache of a wound that had nearly stolen her breath, was strong again. Yet the deep comfort of the soft bed, the warmth of the roaring fire, and the silent vigil Gareth kept at her side felt both alien and profoundly right. She often watched him as he worked, his brow furrowed over parchments, his silver eyes sharp with concentration. He was a king, burdened by a crown, but in these quiet moments, he was simply Gareth, the man whose touch sent shivers through her, the alpha whose presence settled the wild unrest within her. The mate bond, once a source of confusing resistance, now hummed between them, a steady, comforting rhythm. It was a silent language, a constant reassurance that she was not alone, not anymore. One evening, as the last light of dusk painted the citadel windows in hues of violet and rose, Gareth turned from his desk. He found Lyra watching him, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. A soft smile, rare and genuine, touched his lips. He moved to her, settling on the edge of the bed, his hand gently finding hers. Her fingers, once accustomed only to the rough height of her bow or the mossy texture of the forest floor, now responded to his warmth with a startling tenderness. "You are quiet tonight," he observed, his voice a low rumble. Lyra's gaze drifted to the window, to the distant, dark line of the forest. "It is strange," she admitted, her voice still carrying the slight rasp from her ordeal. "This place, it is so loud, even when it is silent. So many stones, so many voices, even in the walls." Gareth squeezed her hand. "You hear the echoes of generations. The citadel has stood for centuries. It has seen many queens." Her gaze snapped back to his, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "Queens? I am not like them. I know nothing of court, of rules, of being inside." He chuckled softly, a sound that rarely escaped him before Lyra. "That is precisely why you are perfect. My mother, Lyra, she taught me that strength is not always found in stone walls or ancient decrees. Sometimes it blossoms in the wild, in the untamed spirit." Lyra's heart fluttered at the mention of Alara. The queen's memory now bound them in a way deeper than even the mate bond. She must have been a fierce spirit, Lyra mused, picturing the graceful woman from the locket. "She was," Gareth confirmed, a shadow of sorrow passing over his features. "And she would have adored you. She would have seen the wisdom in your wildness." The days that followed were a blur of lessons and quiet moments. Lord Alaric, ever patient, guided Lyra through the intricacies of court etiquette, the lineage of noble houses, and the responsibilities of a queen. Lyra, though often exasperated by the stiff corsets and formal dances, absorbed it all with a resilience that surprised even Alaric. She learned not just the rules, but the subtle currents of power, the unspoken alliances, and the quiet fears of the people. Her instincts, honed in the wilderness, proved remarkably adaptable to the human jungle of the court. She found her own ways to connect. She spoke to the stable hands, learning the names of the horses. She listened to the women in the kitchens, hearing their worries about harvests and their children. Her directness, initially unsettling to some, began to earn respect. She did not pretend to be something she was not. She was Lyra, the wild Omega who had fought for her king, and she would be queen on her own terms. One afternoon, a delegation from a neighboring pack, long hostile to the Blackwood Kingdom, arrived. Gareth braced himself for the usual posturing and veiled threats. But Lyra, sensing the underlying tension, stepped forward. Instead of formal greetings, she spoke of the shared hunting grounds between their territories, of the health of the deer herds, and the necessity of balance. She spoke of the hard winter and the resilience of their people, not as Blackwood subjects, but as fellow survivors of the wild. The visiting alpha, a grizzled old wolf named Thane, watched her with narrowed eyes, accustomed to Gareth's stern authority. But Lyra's words, devoid of pretense and full of a raw, earthy truth, disarmed him. She spoke of the forest as a mother, giving life to all, and of the foolishness of sons fighting over her bounty. By the time the meeting concluded, Thane was not just nodding in agreement, but smiling. He had found an unexpected kindred spirit, a queen who understood the language of the earth. Gareth, watching Lyra that day, felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the roaring hearts of the citadel. She did not just lead, she connected. She did not just rule, she nurtured. His kingdom, once a fortress built on strength and fear, was slowly becoming a home, tended by a woman who had once guarded a single grave with fierce devotion. The time came for them to return to the Whispering Vale. It was a journey Gareth had both longed for and dreaded. He had not visited his mother's grave since the day he found it, since the day Lyra had thrown herself in front of him, protecting it from his grief-fueled rage. Now they rode together, Lyra not on a wild pony, but on a fine mare, her dark hair still braided simply, but her leather armor replaced by riding silks. As they approached the vale, the air grew cooler, imbued with the familiar scent of damp earth and pine. Lyra's breath hitched. The familiarity was a balm to her soul, a homecoming she had not known she yearned for. The trees embraced them like old friends, their ancient boughs rustling a silent welcome. When they reached the clearing, Lyra dismounted, her boots sinking slightly into the soft moss. The stone cairn, Alara's resting place, was no longer overgrown. It was tended not just by nature, but by human hands. Fresh wildflowers bloomed around its base, crimson and gold against the gray stone. A small carved wooden wolf, Alara's symbol, rested gently on top. It was clear that Gareth had ensured his mother's grave was treated with the respect due a queen, even in this wild, hidden place. Gareth stood beside Lyra, his hand finding the small of her back, a silent anchor. He watched Lyra approach the grave, her movements fluid and graceful, a reverence in every step. She knelt, her fingers tracing the etched name Lyra. A single tear, unbidden, tracked a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow, not entirely, but of profound peace. Her long vigil had ended. Her queen, her protector, was finally at rest, honored and remembered. She would like this, Lyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The flowers, the quiet. She would know she was loved. Gareth knelt beside her, placing a hand on the cold stone. His own grief, once a raw, consuming fire, had softened into a steady ache, tempered by understanding and gratitude. Thank you, Lyra, he said, his voice husky, for protecting her, for giving her this peace, for giving me this. His gaze met hers, silver meeting amber, a universe of shared history and unspoken promises passing between them. They spent hours in the vale, not speaking much, but simply existing in the quiet reverence of the place. Lyra felt the earth beneath her, the whisper of the wind through the leaves, and the strong, reassuring presence of Gareth beside her. The boundaries between her wild past and her royal future blurred and dissolved. Here, she was simply Lyra, a woman who had found her purpose, her home, and her heart. The return to the Citadel marked a new beginning. Gareth and Lyra, now king and queen, began to rule the Blackwood Kingdom together. Her wild wisdom, once deemed an anomaly, became an invaluable asset. She championed sustainable hunting practices, ensuring the forest remained abundant. She established tribunals that valued truth and instinct as much as precedent in law, bringing justice to many who felt forgotten. Gareth, once rigid in his traditions, learned to listen, to adapt, to see the world through Lyra's eyes. He saw the strength in empathy, the wisdom in humility, and the power in truly connecting with his people, not just ruling them. Their bond, forged in grief and battle, deepened with every shared decision, every quiet evening spent by the fire, every stolen glance that spoke volumes. The kingdom flourished under their combined leadership. The Blackwood Citadel, once a stern, imposing fortress, began to feel like a living, breathing heart of a thriving land. The people, initially wary of their wild queen, came to adore her fierce loyalty, her unwavering honesty, and her surprising tenderness. They saw how she softened their king, how she completed him, and how together they built a future stronger than any had imagined. One crisp autumn morning, Gareth stood on the highest battlements of the citadel, Lyra's hand firmly in his. The sun was rising, painting the vast valley below in strokes of gold and crimson. The fields were ripe with harvest, the river snaked silver through the landscape. In the distant forest, Lyra's first home, stood sentinel, dark and ancient. His gaze swept over the bustling marketplace, the smoke curling from cottage chimneys, the laughter of children echoing from the training grounds. He remembered the years of lonely searching, the relentless pursuit of a ghost, the emptiness that had settled deep within him. He had sought his mother, and in doing so he had found Lyra. He had found not just a queen for his kingdom, but the very heart of his future. He had found a partner whose wild spirit had not just tamed his own, but had made it whole. He squeezed Lyra's hand, a silent promise hanging in the crisp morning air, a future as vast and bright as the sunrise before them. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it.